Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another debate dissection where we'll be taking apart and seeing cause of death for some of the best and worst debates on the interwebs. That's a thing. Now, I first off, I've got to apologize. I am so tired, as we'd say in Australia. I am knackered, absolutely knackered. I did a debate really late last night where the amazing Andrew Wilson, who apparently is the greatest debate ever, just decided not to show up and basically just noped out. So
you're scary. You intimidate all these guys. It's just his ego that he felt like he couldn't say he was afraid of you, but then he makes it worse by demonstrating how afraid of you he is by running away.
I don't know, but I'll let others decide. But I think that for somebody that sort of talks a big game, at least play the game. Like, seriously, if you're going to talk big game, play it. But but the guy stood in. His name was Don. He was quite good. I enjoyed the debate with him. So there was at least something, which I really do appreciate. And a big shout out to Raging Tomato and Don, who stepped in. His name was Don, I think. He was also known as Grid, who stepped in to sort of, cover for the very, very absent Wilson kind of thing. But, at the end of the day, the video's up. You can watch it. It's got timestamps, so you can skip the first part where we're sitting around waiting for somebody to show up and debate. So
Bueller.
Yeah. Well, it's always hilarious, you're really talking about what's best for society, and somebody just makes appointments and doesn't show up. It's just like, dude.
Now we know what's best for society, I guess.
Secular humanism wins by default, I guess. Look, I'm only saying that because they care so much about winning. They have to win. And it's like, well, I don't really think of it in those terms. I think a win is when you have a good debate with differing viewpoints that really, contrast against one another and get investigated so people can understand where they're coming from. But yeah, I'm ready to go, and I've got the thing. So do you know if Joe, the Kentucky atheist, is still doing his ARC protest thing?
Yeah, the fundraiser is happening right now. They were about an hour in when I punched out to come over here. But I think they expect to go like another hour or so. So yeah, we may make some friends partway through tonight.
Yeah, sure. So there is an Arc Encounter fundraiser over at Joe's. I do not take it badly if you decide to go over there. I didn't even get told it was happening. Okay. Well, that's okay. That's all right. I'm good with it. But I might show Joe's ad because I keep forgetting to show it. So I might do that. Sure. And it is sponsored by Pangburn, I believe.
Oh, very sponsored. Yes. Travis has been a big help on the project.
Right. Yes. I've not met him. Robin sort of suggested I meet him, and I'm terrible with social stuff. I never meet people that, I'm not a networking kind of, I'm a networking guy, but I'm a networking guy in terms of computer networking, not people networking, if that makes sense. So, I kind of have never met him, but, yeah, this is the video. So let's go.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just 1 second and I'll get us back. There we go. Okay.
We have returned.
Yeah, that what was, yeah, I even though he said that, I think he's been convinced of that. A lot of the time, Jedi, when people sort of say, hey, I'm religious people sort of say, hey, I know that I'm scraps and I'm trash and all of this kind of stuff. I want to ask, like, who taught you to hate yourself? Was that the church that taught you to hate yourself? Like, it really is this idea that, wouldn't you still love your wife? Wouldn't you still love your children? Wouldn't you still love your family? Wouldn't you still love your country? Wouldn't you still love the people around you? Like, you don't need a Jesus for that. You don't. Like, and I think the main question that I posed was, like, how is it that all of these secular countries that don't have Christianity at the helm, how do they keep together if you need Christianity to not go around doing that? Like, how do they actually work? Because they seem to be doing fine and nobody's Christian, or very few people are Christian, I guess.
Indeed.
I have not seen that, Jedi. I have not seen that. No spoilers. No spoilers. Don't tell me who won. It was a surprise. Okay. Look, I think Joe would have done fantastic. I think he would have done absolutely fantastic. I'm a big fan of Joe. He's awesome. I think he would have done fantastic because Joe has watched a lot of Hovind debates. I know he has. So he would have been absolutely prepared for this. And I got to see that. And I probably will. I'll probably have a sleep today because I only had a few hours and I've got a big sleep debt, but we press on. We're still going. Let's do it. But no, I can imagine Joe would have just wiped the floor with him. And plus, people underestimate Joe because he's got like a Southern accent and people don't take him seriously. But he's a smart guy and he's very capable and he can put together really good arguments that surprise people. And I love seeing it when they're like, hey, this redneck sounding guy is canning my ass. Yeah, he is. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome? No, big fan of Joe. Hi, Dave. Hello, Jessica. So good. Yeah, and look, Jessica, I totally get people didn't want to see Andrew Wilson. Me, I just felt like, and I want to explain that I just felt like secular humanism hadn't been clearly articulated around the debate scene. I have a very well outlined idea of what it means to me and what it is to me. So I really wanted to present that. And I think that, I think I did, really well at presenting it to Don. Admittedly, he was unprepared and that sucks. That position sucks to be. And I've been in there, unprepared and filling in for somebody else myself. But, I think it was good because I managed to get across that, secular humanism is all about human well-being. So you can't, like pump up with drugs and be well, like that isn't something that really occurs. We use it to alleviate suffering, but if you're an addict, you're not well. And things like that, Oh, did you put it up on the Discord server, Jedi? Did you put it up on the Discord server? Left-handed Jedi's been regaling us all with AI art, some of which is incredibly funny, and some of which is just really cool. So I really like it.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
You're not wrong, Yudif. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it may have been a blessing that Wilson didn't show up because the last several debates on this topic that he's done, Craig from FTFE, great guy, but like Wilson just kind of steered him into the tenets of the manifesto atheism version 3.0. And Craig is like, yes. That's not what I'm talking about, my guy. It's like he's so focused on prescriptivism that he ignores the actual point. And of course, that's his strategy. That's his tactic. Right. He likes to not talk about the issue and pretend he won, because declaring things is what they do, especially, the Christian nationalist, open fascist types. But I do digress. The point is that by having a conversation with a different theist who was more off the cuff and willing to have a dialogue, you got a much more productive conversation than you would have gotten with Wilson.
That's true. That is true. So it was actually pretty good. I mean, there was a couple of times, it sort of was a bit aggressive from his end, but that's okay. That's fine. I get where he's coming from, and that's fine. I think that people are like, oh, well, all he'll do is insult you. And I think before I started sort of really getting into debate, that would have been, yeah, it's not worth it, you're just going to assault me. But the question arises for me, why would I care? Right? If you're talking about what's better for society, Christianity and secular humanism, and the secular humanism person is being measured and, you know, giving facts and logic and reasonability, and the other person's insulting, why would I care if the Christian representative is, you know, being insulting and disruptive? Because if you apply that to society, you get a horrible society.
Kind of,
you know, so why
proves the point.
Why would I care? Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I think that in debate, you can sort of have this idea of what it means to win. You know, I think that what he thinks it means to win, i.e., you know, lambast his opponent and make him look terrible and stuff like that. But there's sort of a sort of higher thing going on that, hey, if you're, you know, presenting in such a way that you are respectful, professional, all of these things that are, I would say, would I go so far to say they're virtues in secular humanism? I think I would. You know, just treating people with respect and things would be a virtue of secular humanism. And the other person isn't. I think that's a win, even if, you know, it seems like they're the one, you know, doing all of this stuff. So yeah, I kind of think.
Yeah. I mean, it really, it takes it into a sort of meta conversation, because you go beyond the points being made and actually demonstrate the difference in the worldviews.
Yeah. So I kind of regret that. And, you know, I'm not averse to sort of, you know, dealing with that kind of thing. Yeah, James, he didn't show up. He basically sent through half an hour beforehand or something that he was too tired. And I was up like 11 o'clock at night. Debated until 1 o'clock in the morning. So I find
and
that
he picked the time.
And he picked the time, yeah. So I kind of find that really sort of pathetic, you know, that he's sort of like, I'm too tired. It's just like, oh, geez, man, seriously, pucker up. Like, you've made an appointment, you know, just like get some coffee, you know, push onwards. Oh, no worries. Yeah, Andrew was no show from the man. So yeah, I'm a
which
trooper.
in my opinion made the debate better.
Well, you know, like I did say, I did have a good, you know, debate with Don. Like the guy that filled in was, you know, I mean, he said some shocking things a couple of times, but I don't think it went that badly. He was, you know, fairly good to debate, so I'm happy with that. I'm fine. But yeah, so let's get back into that. Sorry, I'm just talking about my channel and like everything that I'm doing. Amber, what have you been up to since I saw you last week, and you're on your channel?
Oh goodness, all sorts of interesting things, IRL stuff, getting rid of my broken car finally, various details. YouTube wise, I mean, another episode of Transpositions. There was the UK Supreme Court ruling that had so many people in the trans community panicking. So I did a live stream about that to try to simmer things down a bit. And a new top 10 video dropped on my channel. Those aren't doing so super well. I didn't really expect them to. Top 10 is kind of
top 10 sort of
blah format, but
yeah.
But I mean, you know, I was getting the peer pressure. I was getting people going, oh, well, if you just do this, your channel will start growing again. And I'm like, no, it won't.
Well, no, I really think that people chasing fads and trends isn't, you know, I don't know. I'll put it this way. I don't chase fads and trends usually.
Yeah, you got to do what you want to do. And on that note, I actually do have something good that happened. As you may recall, viewers who join us for every debate review, when last week we were on my channel, I set a goal. If we got 10 super chats, I would do a bonus stream. So I did the bonus stream on my channel, and I covered some random science news stories that had just crossed my feed, and AJ from Waste to Human called in and we chatted a little bit, and it was nice.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I like AJ. Me to thinking,
yeah, AJ's so nifty. And so I decided, you know, this could actually be a show format because I had fun. I liked that. And so I I created this. Well, it's sort of in its infancy. I've only done one so far because my schedule is total chaos. But it's called "What's on Your Mind," and it's available it's through StreamYard, so I can put the link in the chat and people can come on and propose a topic or ask a question or something, whatever's on their mind, and we can have a one-on-one chat. And for the time in between, I've got more, random science stories and stuff. If there's nobody to discuss with me what's on their mind, I'll tell you what's on my mind. And it's really fun. So I'm definitely going to do more. I was
hoping it would be a fire pun of some sort, though, like embers burning questions, or
it's a missed opportunity.
Feed the fire with them, but I don't know. I'm a sucker for theming kind of thing. So
I know.
That's okay. No, you're whatever you want. I think as long as you're enjoying yourself, that's fantastic. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I didn't catch that. You're always streaming when I am not up, which I blame you entirely. Like, it's nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me being on the wrong side of the planet, Or is it the right side of the planet? There you go. In sort of trans news, there is also a petition to our government to award refugee status to trans people fleeing the US. I'm not even joking. Like, this is how
I saw
cool
something
Australians
about that in one of the support groups that I'm in.
Yeah, so if you are Australian, because you have to be Australian to sign, it's like an official government petition. It's not just an online thing. It's like to the Australian government. So, but if you are Australian, go and look it up and sign it, because if people have to flee from the US because they're being persecuted for being trans, well, they should be treated the same as any other refugee, political refugee, because that's exactly what they are. So, and it's horrifying talking about, people fleeing the US as refugees, like what have we come to? Usually it's the US providing sanctuary for people that are downtrodden and oppressed, but not anymore.
As they say, under new management.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's pretty rough, but I am glad to hear it, because I've been looking into different countries and possibilities, because like, just not being murdered is a great start, but then what are you gonna do? Like, you need to have like a jobs market that you can work in, that you have the skills for, et cetera, cost of living, access to healthcare. There's so many factors to consider when you're thinking about which country am I going to go to, and will I be able to get like a work visa or something, some way I can stay for a while, and for across various metrics, Australia is very near the top of the list. The only reason it isn't the top choice is because it's so hard to get to from here.
Yeah. And if you can ever make it, if you're a truck driver, Western Australia, the mining sites, they absolutely love anybody that can do any kind of heavy machinery, because we're just a mining state. That's all we do. I mean, seriously, my university had a school of mines. I'm not even joking. Like, just an entire faculty devoted to mining. Like, it's ridiculous. So, but kind of cool at the same time. We provide a lot of resources for a lot of different countries. It's actually pretty financially stable, but it worries me at times.
Is that why we keep finding the new oldest piece of the Earth in that area?
Oh yeah. So Australia is really old, and Western Australia is the oldest part of Australia. So it's just ancient, and it's actually incredible, because there's some really old stuff, like stromatolites are in like the top of Western Australia, and they're like the oldest sort of organism that's essentially unchanged for billions of years. Like, it's incredible. It really shows what you can do when you find your niche.
Yeah, there's so much cool stuff. I only mention it because I saw, when I was getting random news stories earlier in the week, that they found a new oldest piece of the Earth in Australia. We're back to 4.4 billion years now.
Oh, okay. 4.4, hey?
According to random internet news articles, which of course are secondhand from journal papers. You know, it's a telephone game, but
I'm willing to bet it was found in Western Australia. I'm willing to bet it. Let's see. Zircon crystal. Yeah, Jacks Hills region of Western Australia. Of course it was.
Of course it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And, you know, there's been some science news about like discovering a planet that may house life, and that's really exciting as well.
K218b, yes.
Yeah, and that's incredibly exciting. And, you know, I hope we can investigate and stuff like that. I wonder what that will mean for the religious people if they do find life there. That would be, yeah, kind of.
The implications are fascinating.
Yes.
It's no good for us, though, because it's like 8.6 times as massive as Earth. So we would be heavy. It's no, not a good time for us puny humans is.
Yeah, but, you know, at some point in the far future, we may be able to, you know, mine or do something with it, kind of thing. Like there might be opportunities there. Who knows? Nobody knows what that far in the future the world will be like. So
yeah, it's 124 light years away. It'll be a minute before we can even send a probe to go get a close-up look.
Yeah, yeah. Or we invent some technology that can fold space, or, you know, something like that. Who knows? Who knows?
Maybe.
I'm not gonna, you know.
There's surprises every day. Maybe one day it'll be time space.
I mean, people are often quick to, oh, we'll never get to another star. And it's like, well, people thought we'd never, you know, be able to fly as well. And we figured that one out, you know. So I take issue with people saying humans will never fill in the blank. And it's like, well, if we manage to survive and not destroy ourselves over, you know, billions of years, how do you know what we can do? I certainly wouldn't say with any great knowledge what humans are capable of and what we're not capable of. So yeah, who knows? Yeah, I think you're right. Mate. They'll retcon it into the creation story. Ed, you're probably right, mate. Like, seriously. Hey, Dave. Hey, good to see you, mate. Okay, so we're looking at a debate. We started part 1 over on Embers. I put the link for Embers channel in the description, so if you want part 1, it is there. I forgot to put it in the description. I'll do that afterwards. I definitely will do that afterwards. But can we prove God exists? What did you think of the first part? Do you have any sort of thoughts before we start?
Not super impressive, as you might expect. Now, for anybody who missed it last week, the proof they're talking about is Ed Fresser is presenting like logic proofs, like the Aquinas 5 proofs kind of proofs, and he's running it through Aristotle's logic to try to strengthen them, but it hasn't been going so well for him so far.
No, I don't think so. And he sort of really rests upon the Aquinas's arguments, just, you know, as you say, they're trying to be strengthened through Aristotelian logic, but he's really just running through, you know, without considering any later philosopher than Aquinas.
Or even Aquinas's contemporaries.
Well, that's true. And, you know, he's not up to Immanuel Kant or Hume or anything like that, and sort of saying, hey, he's kind of saying, oh, well, they're outside the scope of this kind of thing. Which is sort of weird that's the tact he would take. So he sort of is rooted upon this almost medieval ideas of you know, proofs of a god. Is Aquinas medieval?
I thought he was like 400 or 500, something like that. But I could easily be mistaken. It's been a while since I looked it up. I may be confusing him with like an Anselm or
proofs. Yeah. I think I might be confusing him.
Yeah, all of these old holy fellas.
Yeah. So it's sort of on, you know, first cause kind of stuff, you know, like you know, like there's a first mover. There has to be a first mover who is unmoved, essentially.
It's like pre-deductive deductivism. It's weird.
Yeah. So it's kind of like this sort of, you know, what we know now about the universe is that it's sort of defies any kind of investigation, because our investigative tools just sort of break apart. And I feel like a lot of it is, well, we've got the God, let's fit whatever it is around us that we see into the God concept. And our ideas of things beginning, for instance, it's sort of, things don't really begin. Things just change state. There's no real beginning to, when you consider
only events that begin. Like
right.
there was a philosopher in Aquinas's own time who pointed out that, like, take an avalanche, right? Like, that is a thing that has a definite beginning because it's an event. It's a thing that's happening. So we can look at that and say, okay, what caused it? If you propose everything has a single cause, then you must be suggesting it's the last snowflake that shifts the weight that causes this great avalanche. But that contradicts the idea that the cause must be greater than and more complex than the effect.
Correct. Yes.
If you accept the reality that it's all the snowflakes working together to create the conditions that cause the avalanche, then you have to abandon the idea that there is ever only a single cause to anything.
Yeah, and there's, we don't know why there has to be one cause. And even, like, the thing that gets me is that even if there was a single cause to the universe, that, and you can grant all of this stuff. Let's grant that it's powerful. Let's grant that it's transcendent. Let's grant all these things. There's no specific reason why there must be a God. There must be something with who is an agent doing this. There's no reason whatsoever that I can see. But, anyway, we'll start it off. So, they've had tons of tech issues, but I think they're beyond it now. But Dr. Graham Oppy, I'm really impressed. He's such a methodical thinker. Like, he really does look through all sort of possibilities. I very much like his diligence to, really examining his opponent's sort of entailments, and because he will grant stuff and he will, like, go down lines of thought, and I think that that's important. There's nothing worse than someone who won't even consider your point of view, right? Like the precepts, they won't even entertain that there's no God, right? They won't even let that possibility cross their mind. It's so wild, whereas, people like philosophers, actual philosophers, and not just precept apologists, will entertain all of these concepts and follow them to logical conclusions, which I do like. But I'll start this running and we can go.
Hell yeah.
Right. So it's because, that view is the kind of composition view, right? There's one existent, the thing, and there's another existent, the power, and then you have to combine them together. Right.
Oh, yes. This was his weird sort of, so things have, they sort of, he said something may have the power to cause something, and that's just, one property kind of thing that it has. And he's sort of saying, hey, how do you describe a power of something? And I would probably call it properties myself. Like I said last time, I don't know if power has any special significance in philosophy, but I think they're just properties with the ability to cause or, have something happen. So if, the electricity has the power to electrocute you kind of thing, like it has that power. Or I have the power to jump, like it's just has the property of being able to accomplish or achieve something.
That's not.
You may be overthinking that one.
Maybe.
I mean, going, it can do stuff. It's powerful.
Yeah, I get that. But I mean, I think that the logic follows that something had to have the power. If the universe was, it began, something had to have the power to begin the universe, right? It had to have that ability. Either one thing or many things working in tandem had to have that ability. And I kind of agree with that. But like I said last time, we don't know if the universe actually began. What does begin mean before space-time? what does before space-time mean? It doesn't.
Before is an incoherent concept, but also like it may be incorrectly framed, a kind of category error with this ability to begin, because when we look at the interplay of physics and the natural laws as they exist in the universe we have now, and we make the tiny little assumption that they've always interacted, even if the face of the universe was different, then the beginning of the universe as we understand it today would be an inevitability rather than an ability.
Physical picture that I've got, right? There's things with powers, right? I mean, it's in this sense that it's appropriate to say the simple has the power to go on existing, or the simple has the power to go on existing with the power to go on existing.
So what do you,
yeah, so this was interesting because it seemed like Dr. Feser was basically saying, hey, something must be sustaining everything sort of moment to moment. Like, why do things have permanence? Why do they continue existing rather than not? And I think I do like Dr. Oppy's sort of explanation that you don't need sustaining if something begins and has the power to keep existing. Like, all you need is that first instantiation if it has the power to keep existing. So it's sort of like, why does it need external forces to keep it going? Why doesn't it have the power to instantiate itself? Or rather, instantiate moment to moment itself? It seems a bit wild, really.
Yeah, there's like a broken presupposition or assumption underneath that somewhere. It'd be interesting if they could dig down to that, but it's slightly off topic, so I don't know if they will.
Yeah. What did they call it? What did he call it? He said it was existential momentum. No, that's not the word. Existential. It was existential
inertia?
Something. Inertia. Yes, thank you. Existential inertia. And he's really talking about, if something exists, it will keep going on existing. But I think that Graham Oppy's pushing back really well here, sort of saying, hey, it doesn't need an external power if that has that property, if that has that power to do that. Why do you need something external, which is a fair call?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want a decompositional analysis of that at all.
So,
well, I think we get clear on. Yeah, go ahead, Cameron.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to get clear on what we mean by simple. Is that just like an entity, or what do we mean by simple?
So, a simple is something that has no decomposition. It doesn't have parts that it can be decomposed into.
Okay.
No.
Properly basic.
Well, I mean, that's difficult, because what is simple then? As far as we know, quantum fields would be a simple. They can't be decomposed into anything else, really.
I mean, so a quantum field is several different fields existing in superposition, and things like the production of virtual particle pairs, for example, represent the collapse of multiple subfields within the field, and it changes the field properties in several measurable ways. So it kind of does decompose, or at least decohere into temporary physical reality. So yeah, it's weird. I don't know if there is anything. I'm inclined to say like the photon, but we know a photon, when paired with another photon of equal wavelength, can decompose into a positron and an electron. So
yeah. Well, and it's interesting that whole idea of quantum monism, that everything may be one thing that's quantum entangled, so that the base unit of the universe isn't a quark, it's the entire universe. Like, it is one thing, which is just a hypothesis. I'm not saying that is the case. It's just been presented as, hey, it could possibly be that the smallest unit in the universe is the universe and everything in it, kind of thing, which is wild, which would mean that the entire universe is a simple, which is just, incredible.
From a certain point of view, that does check out both in set theory logic, but also that long-standing hypothesis that the observable universe and what we can extrapolate beyond it, from what we understand, the universe behaves as if it's at the center of a black hole, that this is a chunk of matter in time and space that's fallen down a singularity. And if coming at it from the other direction about this, what is the smallest describable single piece of the universe being the whole universe, that tracks with the concept of us being inside a singularity.
Right. But we don't know that for sure.
No.
It's something that's been posited by quantum physicists. It could be the case. It could not be. That we don't know. It would also explain why we don't seem to find any... well, I'll put that another way. We don't know if there's any base particle to the universe, because we thought it was atoms, right? And then now we know it's not atoms and called it quanta for, just single packets. But even that, we don't know if that is the base particle of the universe. So it may be why we keep having problems finding it. It's because there is no base particle of the universe, and it's the entire universe.
Could be. It's an idea that's been proposed a few times, including by me in my younger years when I was active in the fields of physics. We may be framing our perspective wrongly. That we keep looking for the smallest particle, when really the particles are just anomalies within the field of overlapping waves.
Right.
So we may be looking at this completely backwards.
Yeah. So that's quantum monism, and people scoff, and it's like, well, it makes just as much sense as standard quantum physics, quite frankly. So,
not even kind of.
So let's give a concrete example of something. Would that be like a quark? Or whatever fundamental particle you want to like.
Well, so possibly, but I mean, given the state of physics, it might be that the quarks turn out to be simples. They have no structure. They have no internal structure.
Quarks are composed of subparticles.
Okay. So, I don't... Dr. Oppy, of course, is not a quantum physicist, and hell, neither am I. But, I think he's trying to say, well, whatever... Because, okay, so here's the thing about what he's saying with simples. Because if you want to say, okay, well, I'm here and I keep existing, it doesn't necessarily... I don't necessarily have to have that power. It just may be that the smallest particle has that power, right, to keep existing. And if each smallest particle in the universe does, then the entire universe may continue to exist if each smallest particle in it continues to exist. So what he's saying is that, hey, we don't need to get this power from somewhere else. If the simples, or the smallest possible particles, have this ability, then it's solved, essentially.
Doubt that would be the case, actually, and it's kind of hypothetical whether there is a level at which physics bottoms out in things that have no structure.
So, Ed, do you think that there is no such thing as a simple other than God that has the power to go on existing?
Is God a simple? Isn't it a trinity?
Oh my goodness, yeah. The Christian conception of God is the most complicated bundle of excuses I've ever encountered, and we were just talking about quantum theory. Holy crap. But even a basic God, a simple, super dumbed down 4-year-old version of monotheism, the answer to everything is God. God has a plan. Everything follows God's plan. That's still so complicated with so many moving parts. Like, what are you doing, Cam?
Well, it's odd when they sort of say, hey, we know design by complexity kind of thing. And you're like, well, God's complex. I mean, it'd have to be, right? In order to be the unknowable creator of the universe. If it was simple, we would understand it, but we don't. So,
maybe it's the wrong word choice, and he means fundamental, like the basest layer of reality. When you go past the quantum fields, you find the elusive strings that we haven't been able to so much as even begin to try to detect in decades. But you go past that, the quantum foam, whatever the hell is under that, and you keep digging like it's in Minecraft, and at the very, very bottom, you find God. What if that's what he, instead of simple, he means fundamental?
Yeah, fundamental. Gotcha.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, I mean, it was Oppy that was using the word simple, and he's sort of talking about indivisible particles, so atomic structures. So atomic doesn't mean atomic in science, like atomic. Even in programming, you have like atomic stuff. It just means the smallest particle or the smallest packet, basically, you can possibly have
on its own.
Well, I think there's no such thing as an absolutely simple substance. Something might be relatively simple. So, I mean, I don't want to go too far afield yet from the Aristotelian proof, but Aquinas offers the examples of angels. And of course, for Aquinas, an angel isn't the creature with the long golden hair and the gowns and all that and the wings. It's an entity of pure intellect. So it's a thing that thinks, and that's all it is. It's something kind of like a Cartesian res cogitans. Okay.
Didn't one of the angels in the Bible have a frigging flaming sword?
The one who was guarding the gate to Eden.
The gates to Eden.
Humans got banished through. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it was an entity that just thinks, that's waving around a flaming sword. This is a radical concept of thinking that I've had. Wow. And I don't think he's understanding what a simple that Oppy's talking about. It's sort of, he's talking about something indivisible. It's basically fundamentally a something not able to break down into anything else, essentially.
Yeah, he seems to be misdescribing. I had no idea what the hell Aquinas thinks about angels.
Right.
So I looked it up, and in a very quick internet overview, the idea of there being a hierarchy of 9 ranks of angels comes from Aquinas, and he describes them as distinct species with particular characteristics and so forth.
So seraphim and cherubim and all of those sort of
basically, yeah. I don't know if he goes into the same level of description that later Renaissance artists would produce, but yeah, that's where that comes from. He describes them as beings of pure spirit, not like a tiny god, but more like humans who, how to phrase it? I think it was Raymond Feist who proposed the idea that while humans are physical beings with a spiritual component, angels and other entities are spiritual beings with a physical component.
Right.
And Ed is saying no spiritual, or Aquinas was saying no physical component at all. They're just spirit.
Just spirit.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that they're pure intellect. They're pure spirit.
Right. Well, I mean, in Aquinas's day, the intellect and spirit were kind of morphed together a little bit, like the seat of consciousness was your spirit. I mean, we know better nowadays. We know that it's your gray matter doing the thinking. But I think back in Aquinas's day, that wasn't really clear what was doing the thinking, and I think there's a lot of overlap between, sort of the breath of life and consciousness in general. Like, people thought that consciousness was part of your spirit. We kind of know better now, but yeah, this is what I mean. Like, really, it's almost medieval Aquinas's thinking, which, don't get me wrong, he had some good, like, amazing ideas for somebody, 500 years ago, but do they really hold up today is the question I would have.
For Aquinas, an angel, so understood, is a kind of it's simple relative to physical objects, say, because it's not a composite of form and matter. It's just a pure form, or to be more precise, it's a substance that has a form or nature like anything else does, but it's not embedded in matter. So that's relatively more simple than a physical object would be, but it doesn't have the simplicity that Aquinas attributes to God, where for God there isn't even a distinction, as there is even an angel, between its essence and its existence. So I would say we're talking about absolute simples. Then yes, there's nothing absolutely and simple or simple in an unqualified way other than God for the Thomist or for.
Well, I think under Oppy's definition of simples, you could have something that's absolutely simple. It basically just can't be divided into anything else. I think he's taking it as simple as opposed to complex, sort of in a descriptive way, rather than how Dr. Oppy is using it as something indivisible. Because I don't see why, if we found a fundamental particle of the universe that couldn't be divided, why it wouldn't be absolutely simple. It's very strange to use that wording, though. I always get worried when people start to use absolute, and obviously he knows what it means, but why wouldn't a base particle of the universe, like, just say it was a electron or a positron or something, just say that was the base particle, why that wouldn't be indivisible for all people at all times in all places. Like it would be, right? And that's what absolute means. So I don't know.
I would say for the Aristotelian, for that matter. But if we're talking about simples in a more qualified way, in a relative sense, where and I took Graham to be talking about something at least, I don't know, vaguely analogous to fundamental particles, and not without being committed to the current list that we see in contemporary particle physics, because that's always subject to revision. But something perhaps more basic than that. Well, for one thing, I mean, I think Graham is absolutely right in what I think is implicit in what he's been saying, which is that we're going to have to not think of these exactly on the model of the, what Austin calls the middle-sized dry goods of everyday experience. They're going to be very different from tables and chairs and so forth. But it seems to me like something like the substance, attribute, structure is going to have to exist at the level of these fundamental particles as well. So just like you take an object like an apple, and you've got the apple as the object, and then the redness of the apple, which is a property of the apple.
Oh, hello, Neoplatonism. Hello. Here we go. The redness of the apple. Oh, boy. So he's really talking about universals. Like we have these universal descriptions that apply across things, right? They apply to an apple that's red and a traffic light that's red, and they both have a redness. So we sort of say, hey, that universally applies to all of these things. I'm a nominalist, so I don't think universals are actually a thing. Like redness doesn't exist somewhere. It's just a descriptive tag that we give things when a certain wavelength of light is reflected and that hits our eyes, kind of thing. So I think it's just descriptive, these things. But the Platonist would say, no, there's a ideal version of this that actually exists somewhere on some transcendent plane that makes the redness of all red things red. And it's just like really to me, it's kind of nonsense. The whole idea that like in order for a chair to get its chairness, there has to be an ideal chair somewhere. To me, it's nonsense. Like it just means that we've described something as a chair.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's a suite of characteristics
right.
which we, to a greater or lesser extent, apply to objects in order to describe them, in order to quickly convey a meaning. It's a transmission of ideas shorthand rather than the redness thing gets me because, like, since we were just talking about physics, that makes me think of redshift. The cosmological change in the wavelengths of distant signals. If you take something that's yellow and moving away from you at something like 15% light speed, it will appear reddish. So in a Platonic sense, does the fact that it's moving away from you somehow make it draw more upon the Platonic redness? The entailments are bafflingly absurd.
Right. And while we understand that light as it travels, I mean, don't get me wrong, and do correct me if I'm wrong about it, if I know you're way better at physics than I am, that the light that acting as a wave and a particle, but as a wave, when that frequency gets drawn further apart, as it does when you're moving away, just like the Doppler effect for sound, it changes the frequency as it appears to you, and therefore it will show up a different color. And that's how I understand it. So it's a lot like the Doppler effect when you hear a car go by and it's like, it's the sound waves being compressed coming towards you, and then the sound waves being extended as it goes away from you. So compressed, higher frequency, away, lower frequency. The same with light. Something coming towards you gets compressed, high frequency is blue shifted, and away it gets extended, which, low frequency is redshift.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I got something right. Sounds like alchemy to me. How dare you? Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, you get out of this chat.
And the power of the apple, say, to roll, if you drop it on the table, say, to roll a little bit. Well, just like the redness doesn't exist in a freestanding way, it exists only in the apple that has it. Seems to be the same things to be true of the power of the apple to roll, or the power of the flesh of the apple to, moisten a piece of paper that's placed on, say, if you cut it open and the juice flows out and so forth. So in that sense, and I think that's the only sense I need for my point, the power is parasitic on the substance that has it, just as the property, the redness of the apple is parasitic on the substance that has it. And it seems to me that would be as true of the micro
Well, I
Mark,
think
your ability to be peachy is parasitic upon your substance.
Apparently so. My power to be bald is parasitic upon my substance. Well, I guess I would expect so. I don't know. It's sort of like he's saying, hey, it doesn't inherently have this property. Rather, the property is removed, and like that is somehow dependent on the form of the thing itself. And it's sort of like, well, I don't know why that would be the case, why it just wouldn't have these properties. I don't know. It's a weird one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is it being like, you know, it is the form of the apple and the way that it reflects light that does give it the redness. So I'm not sure why this redness is being removed and somehow that's its own thing. I don't know why. I'm so confused as to why that would be a thing, rather than the apple just reflecting light in a certain way, and that is just the property that it has. I'm so confused
the
about that.
actual property would be the wavelength that it reflects the most light in. Like
Yeah, this is why people don't like philosophy. Like, seriously, I'm
real.
so baffled as to why you would have to separate redness as its own thing rather than the apple having the property of being red. Like, why is it parasitic upon the form?
And what does that even mean?
Yeah, I'm kind of baffled as to why that's the case.
Yeah, we're splitting so many hairs and going so far down rabbit trails. Like, this is the extent you have to go to when you can't just pull back the damn curtain and demonstrate your claim.
Yeah. And it's kind of hilarious that you're trying to prove God with this. It's kind of it's very weird, because even if there
does
was
God have parasitic properties that
maybe
give him attributes?
Maybe. Maybe.
Micro level symbols that Graham is positing as it would be of a macro level object like an apple. And in that case, we have some kind of composition, or if you don't want to call it composition, we have a kind of, you might say, metaphysical dependence of one thing on the other, of the power, just as a property would be dependent on the substance that has it. And I think once we have that, even if we're not talking about form and matter, we're not talking about essence and existence, and I can put all that aside, we still do have a substance power distinction, which is what I'm claiming poses the circularity problem for Graham's position.
Well, now I'm really curious how Graham's going to respond to this.
Well, I kind of agree that, you know, the properties that the apple has, or the powers that the apple has, is dependent on its substance, right? So if it's, you know, a moist apple, it does have the power to give you apple juice. If it's, you know, desiccated, it does not have that power. I get what he's saying there, but why would you remove it from the object's form itself and say, hey, it's its own thing with a parasitic relationship? I don't get that part. Like, I get the dependency, but I don't get that part.
Yeah, how do you get redness without the apple to be red? How do you get the juiciness without the apple to be juicy?
Right. Like, it would seem to me, at least, and maybe I'm not getting something he's saying, but it would seem to me that it is the substance that, you know, inherently has those characteristics. I'm not sure why the characteristics would be removed, put on their own thing, and then be parasitic upon that. I don't understand that. It seems unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
So you can probably guess that there'll be something that looks like a kind of nominalism that's coming in here. So I'm quite happy to say the apple is red. I'm not so happy with talk about redness, like, unless we understand that that's just a kind of convenient way of talking about claims like the claim that the apple is red.
Yeah, so Oppy's a nominalist here. He thinks that redness is just a label we put to describe a property of the, yeah. So I agree with him, absolutely.
So when I was when I talked before about powers, and at other times I'll talk about properties, I would actually prefer a kind of view on which that kind of talk, I take it, is justified because it increases the sort of expressive power of our language, but it doesn't involve any ontological commitment. So I don't think that there are powers, and I don't think that there are properties, and so on. So the kind of view that, for example, Steve Yablo defends his figuralist approach to abstract objects generally is something that I'm quite sympathetic to. Right, so it's somewhat it was sort of somewhat incautious of me to talk about without explaining first the way that I'm going to understand this talk about powers, because there'll be sentences like this, that the symbols will go on existing unless something intervenes to stop them from existing. Right, that's kind of more like what the kind of rock bottom expression of the
there's an
view is.
interesting
Do you mind if I just
point. Jessica Bell mentions in the side chat, redness is socially constructed, meaning humans invented the word to describe a natural phenomenon. And the word is separated from its social origins, given an independent objective existence. That got me thinking about like green apples. Here's an apple with the property of being green, and that got me thinking like, well, it's very us specific. It's very human centered, because like, you know, to bumblebees, apples look very different because they see in a different spectrum of light. And so there is no actual property of redness. That's an optical illusion, for lack of a better term, based on how our sense organs work. And that makes me think that what Ed is trying to get at is that the more abstract the properties you're trying to describe, if you consider those to be their own unique entities, and you get to more and more basic level, you go from redness to the ability to have colorness, and then you get down to wavelength or just perception itself, whatever. You go step by step, removing characteristics until you get to the most basic attribute of being. That's what he's trying to say God is. It's the property of being able to have properties.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, what I was thinking about when Jessica wrote that, and thanks, that's an awesome comment, Jessica. I really agree, is that recently I learned that orange is a really new color. Like we didn't used to have orange. I just looked it up while you were sort of going through that it was first documented a color in 1502, which is sort of 300 years after Thomas Aquinas. So we wouldn't have had the color orange or the description of orange. We could have called it sort of yellow-red kind of thing at that point. So it wasn't actually really its own color. It was seen as a hue of red. So, it sort of begs the question that, well, now that we've got orange, does orangeness suddenly spring from nowhere in 1502 when we separate red and orange into two different colors?
I think that may be the case, because as you can see on the flag behind me, my camera, which apparently is from 1402, can't distinguish between the red and the orange stripes.
Yes.
I think you have
I think you have a medieval camera. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I think that Graham Oppy's correct when we're talking about these things. They're just convenient labels to put on properties that may even have nothing to do with the qualia, and qualia is the our perception, our personal perception of things. Rather, it's just used to express the physical properties of these things that happens to coincide with other people's understanding of it. So trying to explain this like a presup is just horrendous, by the way, because you'll sort of be talking about how, the laws of physics aren't, these laws themselves. They are just humans' description of the physical nature of the universe kind of thing. And they just won't get it. They'll be saying, no, it's got to be this transcendent, all powerful. And it's like, whoa, why? Why don't you understand what I'm saying? But yeah, that's really good comment. The word is separated from the social origin, given independent objective existence. Yeah.
Good stuff. See, the chat says more interesting shit than Dr. Fresser.
Oh, absolutely.
Get a little bit more clarification.
This is why we do these live.
So my phone, would you say that my phone has a certain amount of power? I know we're not talking about fundamental.
Yeah, it's a 120 volts. I'm joking. I don't know. Just saying.
Oh, like particles.
Yeah. So if I wanted to be really careful about what I was committing myself to, and if I knew more about phones, I would say something like the charge of the battery is 67% or something like that. There'd be a way of saying what you said in a way that didn't commit me to there being properties, right? I wouldn't have to say, well, look, no, the phone has this property that its battery is right. That would just be by my lights in that kind of expression, that one. So the phone has the property of being charged 67%. The use of the word property there is just dispensable. I could have just said the charge on the phone is 75%. So, and
you'd agree in the case of the phone, you would still agree though that there's an explanation for why it's at that percentage of battery or why it has that power.
Yeah,
is that enough for you, Ed, to move?
Well, I mean, I wanted to say a couple of things about Graham's response there, which I find very interesting. So Graham appeals to a kind of nominalism, and of course, that raises all kinds of metaphysical issues. Like Graham said earlier, this kind of discussion is inevitably going to end up in much more general metaphysical issues than just theism. But if we can forestall that just a little bit longer, I think I could still push back. And the way I would do so is to say, well, okay, if you're going to make that sort of move and say, look, I mean, all the talk about properties and powers, this is kind of a ladder that I'm climbing, and ultimately I can kick it away and not take that to be metaphysically very robust. I don't really need to in order to make my point and so forth. Well, I mean, one point I would make about that, in addition to all the other realist, nominalist sort of points that would come up, is that we have the kind of Hillary Putnam no miracles objection that talk of powers and properties and the like does so much work in setting up the very position that it would be a kind of miracle if there's nothing in objective reality, including nothing in the nature of the particles that we're positing here that corresponds to it.
Well, hold on a second. He just said he was a nominalist, that these powers and properties are just descriptions of, and sort of vague descriptions. And when we find something similar in that description, we apply the same label to it. I don't think he's sort of saying, like, he seems to be stuck on this idea of, oh, they have to be their own things. They have to be their own separated, somehow imbued on this thing instead of the intrinsic nature of the thing itself. I'm not sure why, because he hasn't explained why that's the case to me. He hasn't explained why it must be.
Yeah, I'm curious if he thinks that these properties, since they are distinct entities in a parasitic relationship with the actuality somehow, if they're changeable. Like, say you did have a red apple, and then along comes the form of blueness, and it's like, no, I want this apple, and it displaces the red. Could the apple become blue if it becomes attached to the property of blueness?
Presumably, yeah. If the relationship is the power or the property is parasitic upon the object, then presumably something could happen to dislodge one parasitic relationship and engage another one. So I don't see why not. Now, that might not be physically possible, but presumably he would argue that sort of through God's miracle it could be possible, right? God could change an apple's
see
property.
Something like that happen. Like when you cut an apple, the interior is white-ish, slightly off-white, but if you leave it out where it's exposed to the oxygen, it gradually takes on the property of brownness.
Oh,
well, it's parasited by brownness. Yes, I know what that feels like, being parasited by brownness. Yeah, sure.
We'd be eliminating one mystery, namely the mystery of that has to do with the circularity problem that I was identifying, by appealing to another mystery, which is that these particles operate in a way that's as if they had powers, even though power talk is ultimately just kind of a convenient fiction or a figure of speech to
like a god.
But you're basically saying, well, believe my mystery, which is a god that gives all this stuff, these things that I can't explain, or even explain why it needs to happen in the first place. I don't. Nope.
To make reference to the figureless position you're talking about earlier. So that's just a general problem that's often raised for anti-realism in general. And that's one point I would make. Another point I would make, though, is that the more you want to really press on this idea that I'm gonna find a way to get around that objection to anti-realism here, and I'm just gonna bite the bullet and affirm a kind of identity. I don't know if that's the way you want to put it, but something like an identity between the thing and the powers of the thing. There's no real distinction there between the symbol itself and the powers that it has. Well, then it seems to me I've got an interesting outcome, which is that these symbols that your position has to postulate really start to sound suspiciously like the absolutely simple, purely actual actualizer that I was trying to get us.
Absolutely simple, purely actual actualizer. What the hell? I presume he could have just said. it could have just said God there, and I think we would have gotten the point. Like, seriously, Ed, man, like, this is why people don't like philosophy. I'm just, you know, I think he's trying to tie it to, for things to exist, it needs an exister. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't see why. And he seems to be having this idea that once something exists, it needs something else to make it exist, instead of, you know, conservation of energy or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
like there needs to be an active pressure causing actively constant existence. Otherwise, it'll like deflate into nothing. Maybe, who knows?
I mean, we do have sort of unstable structures, like radioactive elements, for instance, that have an unstable structure, and we know why they throw off and become something else. You know, losing mass along the way because they're actually throwing off energy in the form of radiation, so they lose mass. But, you know, it's sort of this, once something's stable, it just seems to continue without a problem, you know, like until something else acts on it. And I think that's what Oppy is saying, you know, like, I don't see why things need, you know, with conservation of energy and everything we understand about the way that it works, I don't see why it needs something else in order to make it persist, essentially.
Yeah, like you'd have better odds making a case that a thing needs an actualizer to begin to be, but once it bees, then it is there.
To in the first place. And so then you'd have a problem distinguishing the absolute simple or simples that you're postulating from the Aristotelians or the Thomist conception of God. So it would be a kind of Pyrrhic victory if that's if you really wanted to press on the idea that all talk about a distinction between powers and the substances that have them and all these, you know, the properties of the thing and the thing itself dissolve. Well, then it looks like you're really where I am, and you're just using different language to describe it.
So, and this is the point that you make in the last chapter of the book as well. I certainly don't myself think that I'm affirming some kind of identity between two things, because I'm denying that there is one of the things, right? So I kind of reject that. I would object to that way of putting it. Also, though,
yeah. So he's basically saying that Ed sort of said, "Hey, if you're just merging the two together into one, then you're just affirming some sort of God to do so," is essentially what he's saying. And Oppy's saying, no, I'm saying one of those things doesn't exist. It's not real. Our label descriptions of red isn't a real thing. It's just a label to describe certain other properties that the thing has, right? Like, he's a nominalist, so he's basically saying, hey, these universals like redness or chairness or whatever, they're just there to describe properties that we consider in them. They're not real. So, you know, it's interesting.
The property of propertiness.
Yeah. And I think Ed's sort of coming about it in a, well, what makes it this way then? What imparts upon it this identity, right? So what makes a chair then if it's not the chairness around? And it's like, well, a stump can be a chair, right? Or a, you know, things can be other things depending on what we label them and consider them and how we use them. So I don't, you know, I'm really unconvinced by Ed's sort of, well, there has to be a God imparting these qualities or these powers to these things. I just don't see why it's necessary, or even warranted to claim. I mean, it could be, but how would you ever know? And it's certainly not proving it, you know, like I really don't think it's proving it at all.
Yeah, some of the entailments get a little wacky. Like famously, certain jackasses on the internet have defined a chair in such a way that it includes horses. And so at what point does the horse become a chair? Is it once you sit on it, suddenly it acquires the property of chairness?
No idea. No idea.
It depends a bit, because just taking the last point, it feels like it's going to be a rather more polytheistic than your view, because there are lots and lots of individual simples, right? And we're saying about each of them that there's this identity there. It doesn't look as though on the physical view you're going to identify them all. So it's not really going to turn out to be exactly what was supposed to be proved by the proofs here, that there's just one unactualized actualizer, or just one, it feels like you're not going to get, I mean, it might not turn out to be a coherent view, but it seems like at least initially it's not going to turn out to be your favorite kind of theism.
Yeah, okay. So he's basically saying, well, why does it have to be one? Why does it have to be one giving all these things these properties? If there's all these things around and they're being given these properties, it could be a god for each one of them. It could be a god of chairs. It could be a god of red. Like, why not? That's the whole point. But obviously, as you sort of put it out, and to be honest with you, that's a bit of a jab in philosophy circles, like your favorite one. Like, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, it's very good. It makes me think of a fantasy universe by a fellow named Shirtaloon. It's a lit RPG series called He Who Fights with Monsters. And it's a person from Earth gets sucked through an magical accident onto another world that's very much like Earth, but magic works there. And gods are real, but the gods have very limited abilities, right? Like healer his priest can only heal, and purity, his priest can only purify, and so on and so forth. But there's like beings above the gods that give certain properties, like there's a being called the World Phoenix that gives the world its realness, and then there's the Reaper, who you can guess what he does, but the god of death only guarantees you die. The Reaper takes your soul.
Okay.
So it's fascinating. There's like gods beyond the gods that get to an even more basic level of reality, and there's theories that there might be beings beyond them that are even more simple. Yeah,
it's turtles all the way down.
That's right.
Well, so what I would say to that is that the trouble is that if you press hard on the absence of a real distinction in these fundamental simples, and we'll keep it in the plural, simples in the plural, so that it really isn't in there, a distinction between the substance that has the properties and the properties themselves, or the substance that has the powers and the powers themselves. Okay, so these simples, man, they're really simple. Okay, well then we need to ask, okay, but then how are these different purportedly distinct simple entities? How are they? What is it that makes them distinct from one another? We're gonna have to give some principle of individuation. Now, as Aquinas would say, well, whenever you've got different members of the same species in the logical and metaphysical sense of species, not the biological sense, then the principle of individuation is going to have to be matter. So in this case, these purportedly distinct simples would have to be associated with different parcels of matter.
Well, matter's like, so I think he's talking about, because we wouldn't say that everything's matter. There's energy as well. Like, it's kind of, this is what's annoying me about this. He's going back to Aquinas, and Aquinas had some very misguided concepts about what made up physical things. Like, we know now that matter is energy. It's sort of frozen energy kind of thing, like
crystallized, if you will.
Energy. Yeah, crystallized energy, essentially. So this whole thing, like what differentiates them? Well, kind of, quantum field fluctuations is kind of what differentiates them. I don't know. It's just, why are we going back to somebody in the medieval, or sort of, very shortly post-medieval era to get, views on what reality is? It seems very strange.
Yeah, quite so. It's I don't know. The way he was talking, it made me think of that old joke from physics class, that in the universe that's tuned slightly differently so that matter never forms, it's an all energy universe. In the all energy universe, nothing matters.
There you go.
Does nothing have properties because there's no physical things? No, there's properties. The different energy fields all have their own unique wavelengths and amplitudes and so on and so forth. And that's true here too. Like matter, we have to remember, makes up something like 6% of the total universe.
Yeah.
We're so focused on matter. Dr. Feser here, he's a closet materialist because he's so hyper focused on the matter and not all the other things that seem to be irrelevant based on his prescriptive model on how things should be and interact and so forth. Well, it's very strange.
it's kind of telling because he keeps talking about essence kind of stuff, and that we know that's sort of a blowback to these kind of days where they had no idea what energy was. So things had essences. They had, you know, if you had essence, you could do things kind of stuff. But we know that that's just energy nowadays. So, you know, I really think while it's interesting that they're talking about this philosophically, I think that, you know, Aquinas was trying to understand things from a very, very limited frame of reference. You know, he didn't have access to, you know, what energy was. So he was sort of talking about essence in things. He didn't really understand the distinction between energy and matter because, you know, he didn't know there was energy. He had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when he says, oh, well, the only way we distinguish things is matter, well, no, absolutely not. We can distinguish things with energy as well. You know, there's a big difference between, say, you know, electrical energy and, you know, solar radiation, which is still a form of energy. Like, there's a massive difference there, electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, thinking everything is matter is how you end up with nonsense like gravitons, because there has to be a particle to carry the gravitational force between like, what are we doing? How do the properties interact with the matter if all there is matter? What are we doing?
Right.
But then once you say that, then you've got composition again of the kind that I think you're not going to want to have. Yeah. And I think that any other way to distinguish them is going to involve some kind of composition, or it's going to involve some appeal to laws outside them that determine that one of these symbols is at this point in space, you know, given the laws of nature and the pre-existing conditions, and the other ones at that point in space. And then we've got other kind of composition, namely the symbols and the laws that govern them. So I'm aware that you would say, well, this would lead me at most to a kind of a polytheistic position. But I think that the problem with that is that would itself be unstable, that you'd have to give some account of how these distinct symbols are distinct. And then you're going to be led to say, you know what, actually they aren't distinct. There's just one ultimately simple entity. And then we're back with essentially Aristotelian theism.
Right. So I'm just pursuing this line of thought a little bit further. I think that maybe somebody like Jonathan Schaffer wants to go as far as saying that there is just one fundamental physical simple or something like that. Anyway, it's not a line I'm interested in. I'm not interested in going that way, because what I want to say is that there'll be, if we imagine that there are lots of simples, there'll be different true things that we can say about the different simples, at least in principle. I mean, assuming we had access to this domain, and there'll be true claims about their relative positions.
How do the simple things get their property of simpleness? Does that count as a high thought, Ed?
Yeah, but I think it makes sense under Oppy's view that simpleness is simply not real. It's a label that we put on certain characteristics of things, so they're inherent. But yeah, it's a problem that without the simple thing, such as God, well, how does he get his simpleness? If every sort of power and property is dependent on God, well, he's got properties before that applies. So I think it is a good question, Ember. Like, so where does God get his properties from?
It's mysterious ways.
Yeah. And if something has absolutely no properties, then, you know, I would warrant that it probably doesn't exist. You know, something with no properties whatsoever would be non-existent, because existence is a property in and of itself, right? So how do you get the property of existing if he gives out properties?
Unless Ed is unaware of that necessary entailment that in order to exist, you have to have the property of existence, which by his own definition makes it a parasitic relationship. So God is dependent upon other things, or doesn't have that property, which demonstrates he doesn't exist. I love it when theists disprove their own thing with the entailments of what they're saying.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's so fun.
Yeah, because existence, like if you're talking about powers and properties, then existence would have to be one of them. It would have to be. So yeah, this is an internal critique, people. We don't think that existence is a thing by itself that gets applied to stuff. We just think we're describing inherent characteristics of things. That is what nominalism is, and that's what Oppy was talking about.
The symbols may differ in other ways, like some of them might have one kind of charge and some might have another kind of charge. So it will be true to say this one's positively charged, that one's negatively charged, and so on. But it won't be the case on the view that I'm imagining that, I mean, I said incautiously they have one kind of charge, they have another kind of charge, but the claims that will be true are things like this one's positively charged, that one's negatively charged. And that will be at a kind of fundamental level.
Well,
it won't be that it won't be that there's anything else, a deeper level at which you can explain why this thing's negatively charged or why this thing's positively charged. You'll have hit theoretical rock bottom at that point.
Right. So let me say a couple of things to that. So first, as you say, there are naturalists who would bite the bullet and say, yeah, there's just one ultimate simple, and we can call it the universe as a whole or whatever. And if someone goes in that direction, then I think that they're well on the way to the outcome that I described. That they're really, without realizing it, affirming a kind of theism.
I strenuously deny that. I think that theism, you would have to have some sort of agent, right? Like if it was just a completely natural universe with no more agency than a rock, then, you know, how can that be the God that you're talking about? I really would push back against that. That is the direction that it's headed in.
Yeah. Why would you worship something like that? And what do you get out of that worship?
Right. And if that is the case, then why would it want anything from humans? And would it want anything at all?
Is it capable of want? Does it have the property of wantingness?
Well, I think that goes back to sort of whether something has agency, because only agents who can make decisions can want things or, you know, desire things to be different and then choose for that option to try to get to that distinction. So I think that sort of saying, hey, well, if the universe is just quantum monism is true and the universe is just one thing, sort of jumping from there to a God is kind of, I really think that is a massive gap.
What about the God with the property of gapness?
The God with the property of gapness. Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably. And plus, it doesn't also explain that, you know, the God that you're assuming is a monistic universe, for instance, is giving things their properties, like it's somehow making them have these properties. And I don't see that as the case. I think that things will just have properties within the universe, and I don't think the universe is going parasiting them, you know, like it seems a weird thing to say.
Parasite universe, it'll suck the existence out of you.
Oh, this guy is sucking the existence out of me. I won't lie.
For real. Jedi, on your concept of if a god can regret it isn't very powerful. Yes, that reminds me of a thing that I've been enjoying using lately in the all-powerful discussions is, can God change the past? Because if he's all-powerful or maximally powerful or whatever, he should be able to change the past, to fix things in the past. And never mind the Bible passages about regretting the flood and this and that and the other. Like, what about right now? Like, if you pray for someone with a broken arm, rather than heal the broken arm, couldn't he just prevent it from breaking retroactively? And if God can change the past, then how the fuck is the world like it is?
Right.
It's a fun one to explore, yeah.
I'm sure there's some apologetics around that I'm too tired to go into right now, but yeah.
Of the Aristotelian or Thomistic or Neoplatonic sort. And then it's just a matter of what's the nature of this entity that they've arrived at, and they're going to be hard pressed to avoid attributing to it the kind of divine attributes that the Aristotelian or Thomist or Neoplatonic theists would attribute to it. Okay, so but you say, okay, you're not.
I don't think so. I don't think, you know, it's going to be hard to avoid the idea that it is an agent or a personal God of some sort. You know, it's possible that you get to some sort of pantheism, you know, the entire universe is God. But I think that I really wouldn't attribute something to a god unless it has agency, because that seems to be included on every single description of a god I've ever been given. I'm not sure how, like, if you want to extend the concept of a god to natural occurrences, then, well, number one, I think it devalues what you're calling a god, because that obviously, like, a rock can have no expectation of how it's treated or what to do or who to have sex with, for instance. I think you're devaluing your religion. And number two, you haven't proved that to be the case.
You think your grandfather was a rock.
Yeah. Should I do a Hoven stream? I was thinking of doing one for Easter.
Of course you should.
Okay,
You
I think
already know the right, deep in your heart, you know the truth.
Yeah, I was thinking of doing a Hoven stream and playing Spore, because that's got evolution in it, you know.
Yeah.
And that would be hilarious. So yeah,
that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about doing it tomorrow if I feel up to it. So maybe stay tuned.
Not going to go in that direction. Okay, so fair enough. So then the issue is, okay, but if you're going to stick with the multiple symbols, there's got to be some way to individuate them. And you suggested it might be something like a difference in charge. I know you're not committed to charge per se as the difference, but that, you know, that's kind of a working model. But the problem with that, it seems to me, is that that's going to bring some kind of real composition in. If I've got particle A and particle B, and I want to say there's no real distinction in either one of them between the substance, the particle considered as an entity or substance, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the properties or powers of the particle. Each of them is just kind of a unity. I mean, a real symbol with this cap.
Hoven Spore sounds like a biohazard threat. Hoven Spore sounds like Eric Hoven, quite frankly. Hoven Spore. Yeah.
Damn it, Eric.
Damn it, Eric. Oh man, who taught that man presuppositionalism? Like, seriously, someone's gonna have hell to pay, because he's so bad at everything. And wow, his presup is, I mean, to say bad would be an understatement. It's absolutely terrible. And he's so excited by it. And it's like, dude, like, nobody takes this seriously in the world of philosophy. Most people don't take it seriously in the world of apologetics. Most apologists are evidentialists. They don't go in for this, well, I'm right because I'm right kind of nonsense, you know. Like, it's just, it really is the bottom of the barrel as far as apologetics is concerned. I'm really sorry.
Right. Like, people think, you know, you can't get any lower than Low Bar Bill with his whole, if there's one chance in a million that it could be true, that it's, what about all the other religions, Bill? No, you think he's bad. Holy crap. I almost feel bad for Eric Hoven, because first of all, he grew up with Kent, who proudly talks about abusing him as a child. So he started with that baseline of abuse and really bad creationist apologetics. Learned more creationism from freaking Ken Ham. Learned his pseudo presup tricks from Ray Comfort. Like, he's just getting the best education in how to be an apologist.
No, he learned his street epistemology from Ray Comfort. He learned his presup from Cy Ten Bruggencate.
Oh no!
Yeah.
All the best. He's the perfect synthesis of the inevitable consequences of the worst parts of Christian philosophy.
I mean, Cy Ten is terrible. He will basically go, yes, it's circular, but it's not circular. It's a spiral, and it's like, wow.
It just goes around and around, but also flushes. Apparently, you know, pizza sleeps fast under the West, therefore the much. Never a more profound statement has been uttered.
Is that what he said?
It's one of his famous sayings. Yes.
Yeah, see, like, because he's trying to say, hey, I, you know, just changed the laws of logic, but you haven't. You've just changed the labels you're applying to things. You haven't done anything to change the laws of logic at all. You're just using a different language. Like, he doesn't understand that's not a change in the laws of logic. It's a change in language. It's so weird.
It's pretty damn weird. Although that debate we covered between him and Matt Dillahunty is still one of my fucking favorites, partly because of the way Sai loses his shit over whether the Quran is verified. But the best, my favorite thing I've ever seen, at least from Matt Dillahunty, was the fact that he pre-wrote the rebuttal to Sai because Sai is so predictable. It's just it's perfection. You know, it's give him a freaking Grammy and an Emmy or whatever the version is for debate, because that was so fun.
Yeah. The wild thing is he thought he absolutely demolished Matt Dillahunty, and he did.
Well, he presupposed it.
Apparently so. Apparently so. Hi, Maya.
Say, you know, in a robust sense. But the way they differ is one has a negative charge and one has a positive charge. Then it's hard to make sense of that, in particular how that's going to do any sort of explanatory work, unless we're some kind of realist about a property like charge. And if we're realists about it, then it seems like we're bringing some kind of composition back in, and then we're back with the sort of problems that I was trying to raise for you earlier. Whereas if we say, no, we're not realists about charge and any other property, then we're back with the other problem that we don't really have a principle of individuation after all. So that the position really seems to work if we don't.
An interesting conundrum, because charge is just deviation from the neutral, right? Like we call -3 is the same distance from the neutral point as +3, just the positive and negative just denotes the direction of travel, right? So does charge apply to properties as a sort of meta property? Like, can you have positive redness and negative redness, or is it its own separate property?
I don't know.
This gets kind of weird.
But I don't. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like he's trying to reduce the property of charge to a further simple, basically. And it's like, well, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, like how do any properties that can apply to other properties, how do they interact, and how do we determine like the hierarchy of properties parasitically relating to other properties to affect an actuality? Like, how do we figure it out? How do we demonstrate that our ideas are correct? He's inviting this whole mechanism of science into this thing that he's just made the fuck up.
Yeah, and he's kind of, I think he's just trying to say, basically, if you have any, basically, any base particle or any base simple thing that everything is reducible to, then that's God. And if the entire universe is connected and all one thing, then that's God. And I feel like he's really making the term God do some real heavy lifting where it comes to describing what it is, because he's sort of just giving this nebulous of wherever you end up as that is my foundation, then that's God. And I feel like a God should have more properties than that, than just it's the foundational unit of reality, essentially.
Yeah,
I think it should have much more properties than that. Like, you're really talking about a all-powerful agent that, you know, has some kind of control over the laws of nature or the physical reality.
Yeah, monotheistic gods are supposed to be the greatest thing in all reality, that reality exists to serve, in fact, not like the most fundamental, most basic, most powerless thing. It's very strange. I just kind of want
to... Oh, hello, Nancy. So glad you came by. Yeah, I loved your stream earlier. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Disambiguate between these two ways to construe it, these two alternatives that I say it falls into, one or the other.
So I'm not sure. I mean, think just about realism. I take it that it's just true that the symbols, some symbols are negatively charged, some symbols are positively charged. In that sense, I'm a realist about charge. But I don't think that each symbol is a composite of form and matter, or, you know, the substance and attribute or something like that. I don't buy into that kind of metaphysics, right? So in that sense, I'm anti-realist, but I'm not denying that the symbols have that it's correct to say this symbol's negatively charged and that one's positively charged. And that seems to me to be the important question about whether I'm a realist or an anti-realist, but maybe that's,
Yeah, I guess I just want to, even putting aside the specifically Thomistic stuff about essence and existence and so forth. So I'm willing to bracket that for the purposes of this specific point. It seems to me like if you're gonna distinguish the particles by reference to positive versus negative charge or anything else you might want to appeal to, and then you're going to affirm a kind of realism, therefore, about charge, then we're saying, okay, particle A has negative charge, particle B doesn't. And so particle A has something the other one doesn't have. And what is that something if it's not something distinct from the entity that has it? And in which case we're back to realism about properties and or powers. If we just say, well, they're just different, and the differences don't involve a difference in properties or powers, because we don't want to be realists about properties and powers, then it seems like we don't have really an explanation. We've just got a kind of bare assertion. And then now here this might be the point where we're led into more general metaphysical questions like the principle of sufficient reason. But it seems that we're going to be led to some kind of just brute fact that there's just a brute difference between them. And the brute difference has to do with negative versus positive.
Yeah, I kind of dislike brute facts, but the fact that negatively and positive charged, they kind of are. So how would you differentiate between negatively charged and a positively charged, say, electron or something like that? How would you differentiate between the two?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. The easiest is to measure the charge. Okay, so we figure out the electrical charge of an electron by measuring its mass, but we measure its mass by the way it interacts with other things. It gets kind of intense after a minute, but the direction of charge.
Electrons always have a negative charge.
Yes.
And protons always have a positive charge.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's neutrons, which always have a neutral charge.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating is that we see that there's like a negative and positive charge when it comes to mass as well, because when you take a neutron and you give it a minute to decay into a proton and an electron, it has to emit the electron in order to keep the total charge zero, but it also emits an antineutrino of exactly equal mass to the electron because it has to balance the mass as well, or it becomes unstable. And so you can't force an electron back into a proton to make it go back into being a neutron unless you add back that antineutrino to keep the mass balanced. It's fun, but it works the other way too. It hasn't been tested yet, but it's been hypothesized that if you take a neutron and remove a positive neutrino, you will get an antiproton and a positron.
Right.
But we don't know for sure, because it may be that because it's hypothesized that neutrons are their own antiparticle. But if that were true, then neutrons should annihilate with other neutrons, and that's not what happens. So we're not quite sure on that. Maybe someone like Dr. Tapioca Weasel, who shoots lasers at atoms all day, would know, but to my knowledge, we don't have a solid answer on that one yet.
Yeah, so we don't really know why they're positively and negatively charged. We just know that they are, that some attract and some repel, right? That's sort of electromagnetism 101, but we don't really know why they have these certain properties.
Well, that's another one of the our labels thing. Like we could just as easily say the electrons are positive and the protons are negative. It just indicates the direction of deviation from the neutral point, not that there's any inherent quality to it,
So I think that that's what they're talking about with powers, so that the negatives has the power that when put with another negative, it will move away from one another. It will exert that electromagnetic force. And when a negative and a positive are put together, it has the power of attraction kind of thing. It will attract one another. but it seems to be that their charge isn't just a property of them. That charge that we're describing seems to be the thing itself, right? That an electron is negativity, basically. That sounds horrible. It sounds like electrons are depressed. But you know what I mean?
Save the electrons.
Right. But you know what I mean, right? That it isn't just that there ain't, it's a particle that is negative, but that is negative electromagnetism.
In a very real way. So remember, in quantum physics, the idea is that we're taking energy fields and assigning them as discrete units to make our math easier. An electron isn't actually a particle, it's an energy field, but it's a single definable unit, and we refer to it as a particle for our convenience, but it isn't actually a particle.
Right.
So yeah, it is a negative electromagneticness that happens to be conceptualizable as a particle.
Yeah. So and then there's the particle wave duality thing that blows our minds even now. It's kind of really wild that we look at, photons, for instance. Sometimes it's a particle, sometimes it's a wave, depending on how it's kind of got that duality. So, he's sort of talking about these particles with a charge rather than the particle is the charge. And I think that could bridge that gap between, what gives these things its properties? Well, we're calling it this thing, but in actual fact, it is the charge.
Yeah, it is the charge that happens to have some mass, because energy and mass have a direct relationship. In fact, we're just coming out with, just a few days ago, there was a new hypothesis put forward to try to explain the absence of detectable dark matter that indicates that the interactions of energy fields create effects that are indistinguishable from mass, because they're creating distortions in the neutral field of time-space overall, which is what energy does. It's ripples on the surface of reality. So it gets kind of out there. So, but to your point, basically an electron is energy. It is the negative charge that happens to have a mass component.
Right. And which one has the least mass? Isn't it the neutron? Isn't it? I think, or is it the electron? Because
the electron is the tiniest of the main three. The lowest mass thing that we're presently aware of, without getting into like particle collider level shit, is neutrinos, because they're neutral just like neutrons, but they're barely there. They're like tiny little
not have mass at all. Like they don't have any mass.
Neutrons have
no, photons.
Oh, okay, photons are complicated, and
certain people and the rest wasn't. The rest was easy as.
Absolutely. Some physicists will say they have no mass, but that's not entirely accurate. They have zero mass, which is functionally the same for most purposes, but there are some purposes where it freaking matters, like the deviation of light when it encounters a gravity field. If it had no mass, it wouldn't interact with the gravity field, and we know it has zero mass. Because we can take two photons of the same wavelength, shoot them at each other, and they will decay into a particle and antiparticle pair, which have mass. They have equal and opposite mass. In fact, you might say a positive mass and a negative mass. And when you put those particles back together, they annihilate back into energy waves of zero mass. You cannot take a mass of one and a mass of one, have them annihilate, and have nothing. You have at best zero, because you've taken a +1 and a -1 and created a zero.
Right.
Like I said, it's complicated.
I hear you, but sort of the whole thing of negative mass is just, that's wild. I bow to your experience with physics, because that is not my strong suit. But that is so fascinating, like really.
That's why Dr. Tapp and I got so excited last year when that study came out that showed antimatter falls down in a gravity field, because we didn't know if it does have negative mass, it may well fall upward. We had no idea. It had never been tested.
Right, but it falls downwards just like normal matter does.
Yeah, it's
that's wild.
It's so fun. It's so fun.
Yeah. But this is the problem. He's sort of going back to, you know, somebody that lived circa, you know, 1500 and sort of applying philosophy with no knowledge of the difference between matter and energy. And it's a problem. And then, you know, now we've got quantum fields. It's sort of, well, that's another step removed again. Of course, Augustine didn't have any idea of what any of that stuff was. So he's talking about things like essence and these, you know, sort of really kind of mystical things when, you know, we kind of have better language now to describe them. Hey, Tori.
Charge, but negative versus positive charge doesn't have to do with one having a power or property that the other lacks in some robust sense. Because if you don't want to be a realist about powers and properties. I mean, to me, even putting aside the question of principle of sufficient reason, it seems to me like I'm having trouble getting a handle on what the position even is if we're going to say there's a difference there, but it's not a difference in the powers or properties they have. But even if we could put some content on it, we'd have the problem that it's going to be a brute difference. It's going to posit brute facts, therefore it's going to violate the principle of sufficient reason. And as you know, I would affirm the principle of sufficient reason.
So the principle of sufficient reason essentially is that you've got to have sufficient reasoning to explain why something exists. So it kind of pushes back on what they call a brute fact, which is sort of saying, hey, the world is just this way, or this fact about the universe is just this way. There is no real cause or reason for it. It just is. I dislike brute facts. I'm not entirely opposed to them, but I dislike them just because, you know, there should be explanations for things. Even if we don't have those explanations, it kind of just says, hey, there's something that's unknowable, uncaused, and not really a reason for it at all. And I just, you know, scientifics, you know, in a scientific sense, that's kind of really inadequate. You know, we kind of go,
very
okay,
frustrating.
Yeah,
that's a thing that you share in common with physicists, because if you keep asking why, you'll push a physicist back further and further to smaller and smaller particles and more fundamental rules until eventually you get back to, well, that's just how it came out in the Big Bang.
right.
And it's not explained yet. And oh, that's so frustrating. It's not explained yet. It's like, oh, if I had a time machine, I could go forward another 100 years. There'd be so much more that's explained. Rawr.
Absolutely. But we don't know if there's any brute facts or not, so I wouldn't sort of hinge arguments on them. My Unfinished Journey for $2.22. Thank you, My Unfinished Journey. Says, Hail Nero, Mark, Ember, and Mass, but not energy. Not energy, damn it, because we missed that one out. So, yep.
Well, according to Einstein, mass and energy are interchangeable.
Well, I don't know why Nero, but Unfinished Journey, you can hail whoever you want. That's fine. Super chat away and hail whoever you want. Yeah, I just think you know, it's sort of I don't think that although, you know, sort of saying, hey, something is a brute fact is different than saying, hey, it was natural processes that formed the universe like that, right? If you sort of say, hey, the universe was in an atemporal state, and we don't know this for sure, this is just one hypothesis among very, very many among physicists, tons of them, saying that, hey, the universe was in an atemporal state, a quantum plasma or a quantum field, and then collapsed into the singularity, Big Bang, etc. Now, we don't know that for sure, but it does meet the principle of sufficient reason. And it, you know, it isn't just a brute fact that it's like that. It is a natural formation of the universe. So I don't, you know, see why that isn't just as it is, you know, like, because when he's sort of saying, hey, if you've got this, you know, reason why things are the way they are, essentially that's what he's doing. Why are foundational things the way that they are? He's sort of saying, well, whatever that is, it's God. If it's just a natural process, then that's no description of God I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's like saying God is nature. Nature exists, therefore God.
Right.
Like, be a Gaiaist then, and you'll get a lot farther, because you can demonstrate the world and the ecosystems exist. It's something anyway.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the you know, God of Spinoza or the God of Einstein. You know, just the natural laws of the universe are God. But I think that if you're using it like that, it's more metaphorical than, you know, sort of saying, hey, there is a actual being that has all this power and everything like that, because the natural laws of the universe have no agency. They just do everything. They can't change. They just progress along the natural sort of groove that they're in. So I think sort of applying that to a god is it would be a weird god.
It makes the god powerless.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Exactly. Because, as far as the natural laws go, if you roll a boulder down a hill, it's got no power to, change the laws of physics so it changes direction. It simply does what it does. It has no ability to have any agency whatsoever and is powerless. Yeah.
Though that would take us into broader metaphysical issues.
Yeah.
But
so Graham,
that's the sort of family of problems that it seems to face the position.
So Graham, before you come back on that, I just wanted to let the listeners know we're going to do something special tonight. We're going to have a Patreon-only question and answer time. And the link to the question and answer video that we're going to be using is in the description of this video. So if you want to ask questions to Graham and Ed, then make sure to sign up on our Patreon. Anything over $5 a month is going to get you access to the question and answer period that we're going to have. And actually, we're going to start that fairly soon because time has already flown by. We got about another 10 minutes before we're going to wrap up, and then we're going to move to the question and answer period. So check for the link in the description if you want to participate in the question and answer time, and I'll hand it back over to you, Graham.
Oh, somebody said weasel too often. It was probably me. Hey, Tab, so good to see you. We were talking about negatively and positively charged particles and whether negative and positive were a sort of a property of those particles, or whether the particle itself is, and I used the word negativity, and that was just hilarious because it sounds like an electron is really depressed and just sarcastic and stuff, like
sad electrons
shits on everybody, so
that's why they zap you, they're rooting for a fight.
Not only my favorite weasel, but my favorite mustelid as well is Dr. Tapioca.
That's a bold
weasel.
Claim.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about generally, it definitely is otters. But if you're talking about a specific mustelid, I'd have to go with Dr. Tapioca weasel. I'm sorry. It's just,
In fairness, he does have a hell of a weasel dance.
The best weasel dance.
Okay, sorry. Now I've lost my train of thought. It's one question whether you say something like this symbol is positively charged. It's another question whether there's some informative analysis of that you can give that brings in its train a bunch of metaphysical commitments. So whether, in some sense, saying that commits you to there being properties or powers or whatever. And another question, which I want to distinguish, is whether you'll be happy to say certain kinds of things. So, for example, that you might be happy to say that the symbol has the property of being negatively charged and take that to be a kind of just a trivial notational variant of saying that the thing is negatively charged without thinking that there's any metaphysical commitment that goes along with it. If in your theory you say sort of at the bottom, there's a bunch of symbols that are positively charged and a bunch of symbols that are negatively charged, and that's your if you're thinking about the present, you think everything's constructed out of that. Let's suppose. I mean, that's obviously not how it is, but let's just pretend. I don't see that there's anything here that's even prima facie going to be a violation of the principle of sufficient reason, because there'll be an explanation of the existence of these symbols here and now in terms of the existence of things earlier, right? Remember the idea of the conservation, we'll call it the inertia of existence.
Existential inertia is what he's talking about. So he's sort of saying, hey, there'll be a cause behind this. Like I was saying, maybe it was a natural cause of the universe forming. We're not saying that it's just a brute fact that it just is, but it's totally fine to say, hey, there may have been a natural cause. Now, we're not claiming that to be the case because we don't know where the universe came from or how it formed. We only know from the beginning of the Big Bang or the expansion period. So, you know, it may have a reason, a natural reason. And he's sort of trying to, Dr. Feser is trying to say, well, that is God. And it's like, well, you know, just a natural cause is a really crappy God.
Yeah, because again, powerless, no agency. It's just inevitability. It's basically, you may as well say gravity is a god, because gravity doesn't pick and choose what it just does.
Right.
Etc. Right. So I don't actually see why there's a looming threat of violation of principle of sufficient reason if you were to take this line.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, the reason I said that I suggested there's a threat of violating the principle of sufficient reason was simply that it seemed like you wanted to individuate the fundamental simples, A and B, say, in terms of charge. One has positive charge, one has negative charge, and at the same time not be a realist about charge considered as a property, say.
Yeah, I don't know about that, because you know, they're not the same simple with different properties. You know, like we're talking about electrons and protons, right? We're rotten, like they're not the same thing with just a different charge.
Exceedingly.
Right,
fact,
when you split.
It's one of the remarkable things is that there was a proposal very briefly that charge equaled mass and size and other properties. They could just be pinned down to charge, but no, because electrons are very tiny, have very small mass. Protons are comparatively very, very large with a shit ton of mass. It just, no, the property does not determine the other properties of the thing. They're correlated, but not causative.
Yeah. And I think that in a way he's trying to say, like, I think that Oppy's trying to say, hey, negative charge is a label that we give this you know, base particle, but it doesn't, you know, it isn't that it's a property of it. It's just a label that we give it for what it is. Like it's a negatively charged particle. But I don't think, I'm not sure. I mean, I would have to I would have to, you know, talk to Tapioca Weasel or something like that and find out, you know, are these individual particles with a charge, or is the particle the charge? Because I think the second is true, that the particle is the charge, not it has a charge. So if you've got electrons running around an object, it has a charge, right? Like it has a charge, but the electrons themselves do not have a charge. They are the charge, as far as I know.
Well, it's a matter of perspective. Like one of the ways we produce antimatter, for example, is well, the method they use in CERN, or at least one of the methods, the one I'm familiar with, is they shoot protons around the accelerator and then they have them collide with specific materials. I believe it's gold, in order to change the properties of the proton to effectively reverse its charge. And so we're effectively taking the same particle and reversing the charge. It remains the same particle, but it's opposite charge. So it's not that the charge is the particle per se. And but that, you know, that works the other way too. Like in positron emission tomography, the medical scan application, we use certain radioactive elements that produce positrons. And then the positron meets with electrons in your body and annihilates, and you douse yourself with gamma rays, which pass right through you, so we can develop an image of your body. So in that case, we're not reversing the charge of anything. We're using a specific kind of emission to create the charge, which happens to also be the particle, so that it annihilates with existence. It's complicated.
Yeah, Tap's saying it's not the same particle, which is sort of what I'm assuming. No. The valence electrons around it, they're what form chemical bonds. So basically they interlock with the other molecules. So you're looking at molecule level where we're dealing with simple sunflower. We're dealing with, protons, electrons, and, well, not really neutrons, but yeah, they're the neutral. So when you're sort of talking about protons, they are positively charged, and the valence electrons are attracted to that positive charge, which is why they bond with other molecules. So, you know, I'm not sure what you're saying. Valence determines charge. It determines the charge of the molecule, but we're not talking about molecules. Okay, more simplistic. Electrons, protons, neutrons. Okay, we're not talking about molecules. I think Sunflower has a background in chemistry, so or organic chemistry. So obviously he's thinking about molecules and the way that they're, you know, the valence electrons can cause molecules to basically essentially bind together, but that's not what we're talking about. So maybe Google, look it up, and electrons only have only 3 properties: mass, spin, and charge. Interesting.
Well, properties that we can track at this point. Although, well,
do we know what gives electrons the property?
Well, it depends on what you mean. Like spin, for example, seems to be just a description of what the thing does, not quite the same as a property that it has. It's like saying what gives you the property of breathe. Well, no, that's not. That's the property of existing, basically, the way you exist, the fact that, you know, all your particles are spin one kind of thing. It's very, very basic. It's not a thing that, if it can be changed, we don't know how. We don't understand enough behind it yet to really get into it. So it's unless Ed is right and the properties of things are the result of some kind of platonic parasitic relationship whereby a thing is imbued with a thing. It's just, yeah, it's weird.
But like, it's not that simple. They have a lepton number, electroness for back to the bad electron, but they're typically reduced to those. Okay. So this is getting even more complicated than we first thought, and I'm way too tired for this. I'm sorry.
That's why
yeah,
we don't like that concept of, you know, properly basic or simple things, because every single time, like you were saying earlier with the concept of atoms being indivisible, every single time we look closer and we go, there's actually more to this than we thought. There is no simplest thing that we know of.
Well, that we know of. I mean, you know, but how, like, it's like the problem of infinity. How do you know when you've gotten to the simplest thing? Right, because we get to the atom and go, well, that's the simplest thing, and then we're wrong about that, and, you know, we get to these layers and think, oh, that's the simplest thing. So how would you know that you've gotten to the simplest thing? Because if you just don't find something similar, yeah, it could mean there's nothing simpler. It could also mean that you just haven't found it.
You know, when I was really, really little, I used to have dreams about infinite regress, and they took the form of cheese because it was convenient for my brain to handle, especially while I was napping. And I'd start with a big old block of cheese, and then a knife would come down and cut it in half, and then half would go away and the other half, and then the knife would come down and cut it in half. And we'd just keep going and going until we reached a point where the cheese was so small that it was smaller than the width of the knife, and then my brain would have to come up with another way to continue cutting the cheese in half, and it just kept going. There was no bottom to how. I mean, in reality, you'd eventually reach a point where it's one molecule, and you can't cut it anymore. It's no longer cheese. You cannot cut the cheese beyond that point. But in the metaphor,
Ember cuts the cheese. You heard it here first, okay?
Yeah, Zeno's mozzarella.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, and Archer, did you think protons and electrons would not be complicated? That is a valid point. That is a valid point. But I don't think philosophy added to it is making it any simpler whatsoever. I'll tell you that right now. So yeah. But yeah, I don't like, it just seems to be you're right, it's sort of a God of the gaps almost, that you're sort of saying, well, whatever you arrive at for your fundamental, you know, why these things have, it you know, it's a God. That's what's God. And I think that's a real cop-out, to be honest with you, because of the reasons previously stated.
Mm-hmm.
Electrons are the simplest thing I'd probably name, and the only class they ever dropped and retook was a class when you learn how to make Feynman diagrams into concrete math. Okay, well, I mean, you got it, though, eventually. Look, retaking a class in quantum physics is not the shameful thing you're making it out to be, Dr. Tapio. Like, seriously, dude.
Yeah, solid point.
Yeah.
Electrons aren't simple, but everything else is more complicated.
Yeah, but they're talking about simple, so the fundamental particles or fundamental entities in the universe, or, you know, whatever is fundamental in the universe. So we don't know if that's the case, but I see Oppy's point that if there is something fundamental in the universe, I don't see why you have to sort of have something giving it its properties. I just don't understand that. It's baffling to me. Apart from somebody's using a medieval philosopher to sort of say there has to be something giving it its properties.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Because you don't want to be realistic about properties in general. And the point I was trying to make was that, well, if we say they differ with respect to charge, but charge is not the sort of property that one has and the other lacks, because there are no properties. We still want to collapse properties into their bearers, say. Then what we seem to have is just a brute difference. We can't say anything more about what it is to have a positive versus negative charge, other than that, just that it's a difference that A and B have, and therefore a kind of brute difference. And so I was taking that to entail a kind of brute fact about them, and it's the brute fact about them that I would say violates PSR. Another thing I want to say, though, is that maybe you want to interject at that point, or I could make this other point and you could respond to both of them. It's up to you.
Okay, so let's take this point. So I guess there are two ways you can go. I mean, one way you can go is just thinking that there are different kinds of simples. I mean, to speak with the vulgar, right? And that really is rock bottom, at least as far as the present's concerned.
Yeah, so electrons and protons are not the same thing. Like, why couldn't there be more than one simple? I don't really understand. Like, you're assuming there's only one fundamental particle, and I understand why he thinks that, but why do we have to?
Well, have you ever heard of the God particle, Mark?
Yeah, I have. That's a Higgs boson, isn't it? Higgs boson that we found?
Well, okay, so that's complicated too. The standard model predicted a whole bunch of little tiny subparticles and so on and so forth. And there was one outstanding that we hadn't been able to detect yet, the Higgs boson. And then we did some more experiments and we found another particle that definitely wasn't one of the ones previously identified.
Right.
And someone said, oh, we predicted an additional particle. We've observed an additional particle. They must be the same particle.
The same particle, yeah.
But it hasn't actually been confirmed. It's just assumed.
Okay.
We've produced the particle more times. It's been confirmed we can produce it, but we don't know for sure it actually is Higgs or something else that hasn't been predicted. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. I thought they'd found the Higgs boson, and that's what they were calling the God particle. That's all I'd heard. But they think it's the God particle or the Higgs boson particle, but they don't know. Great.
I mean, it probably is, because we predicted a particle and there's a particle. But it's just funny to me because we don't actually know, and everyone just asserts, you know?
Right.
You may have a historical explanation of how it came to be that there are different kinds of simples. But you might also think that there's just one kind of simple, and somehow or other the variation in properties emerges from the different ways in which the simples are combined into composite objects, right? That's also not ruled out at this stage, I guess. So that was the kind of small point that I thought I'd make.
But we still need to be able to distinguish the simple, even if they're the same kind, they'd have to be different instances of the same kind. And so what I was suggesting is that individuating them as distinct instances of the same kind is going to land you in a problem if the way you individuate them is by reference to properties, since that would introduce composition. And then if you say, well, no, I don't want to be a realist about properties, then we're left with just, you know, a brute difference between them, which brings us to the PSR, the violation of PSR problem. It's just a brute fact that they're different.
But the individuation could be like this. There's one, there's another, there's another, there's another, right? and in that, I wasn't appealing to any properties, right? You might think that underlying that individuation, there's a spatial distribution, and we're talking about the relative spatial positions of things relative to me, and that seems fine, but that was all I relied on in order for there to be individuation of these things, right? But they can be, I mean, if you want to put it that way, this one's different from this one because they occupy a different position in a global spatial arrangement.
That's an interesting take. What is the distance between two otherwise identical things itself a property, because it's a relative thing? And what if there's multiple things? And where does this property of distance come from? Because it's another one of those meta properties that doesn't directly apply to the thing itself, but the relative circumstances around the thing.
Right.
Very peculiar.
But wouldn't it be is its location a property? Like, would we call that a property? I don't think in sort of philosophical terms that it would necessarily be a property, like its position. I mean, if you have an apple and move the apple to somewhere else, it still has the same properties and the same powers.
To a descriptive extent, but in the context of overall reality, like just to exist, depending on the lens you're using to evaluate the question through, entails defining its characteristics as a specific location within time and space. If you move the apple, then its location within time and space is changed. And so its properties have changed, not its intrinsic properties, but its other properties, its locational properties, if you will.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair.
Well, but what I'm asking though is what makes it the case that the spatial arrangements are different? So if we said, and I know at this level that we're talking about, we're not talking about material objects of the kind with which we're familiar with everyday experience. Fair enough. But nevertheless, if we say, okay, they're somehow spatially separated, then we need an account of what causes or explains the spatial separation. It seems to me like to appeal to something like spatial separation ultimately presupposes that they're distinct and therefore can't explain what makes them distinct.
Well, it's kind of odd. He's kind of going back to, why is anything at all different? And if you can't explain that, then it's God. And that's what I feel like. I mean, he's probably not. He's probably just sort of saying, hey, you don't have an explanation as to what differentiates these things from one another. But at the same time, it's like, well, you're not getting any closer to a God there. I mean, you can say, well, whatever that is, it's what I call God, but you really haven't defined it any more than a label put upon anything from physical, natural laws to a supernatural creator of the universe.
I don't know. My trains of thought are running away from me in many, many different directions. Like, the possible
mine derailed ages ago.
Oh, it's fucking crazy. Like, does the space between objects, is that its own thing that has properties, like the amount of volume of the space between the two apples, is that its own distinct thing? Is it a combination of many things that collectively have the property of comprising that amount of distance? And what gives that the property of existence? And how do these things all interrelate? It gets really complicated.
You can have a single entity be spatially distributed in a non-connected blob in quantum superposition. I'm really going to be upset if blob is a technical term in quantum physics and not just something you've thrown out there, Taps. I really will be upset if that's a technical term, because seriously.
It's a great comment, though, because it tickles my brain. It makes me think about the possibility of the way entangled particles are often described is that they're connected through some. They're basically in contact with each other in a way different from the normal three spatial dimensions that we conventionally measure. That it involves another kind of dimension, and so it creates this idea of a spatial distribution through quantum superposition rather than physical distance. And it just, it tickles my brain.
So instead, so this is the quantum particle spatially distributed. So in a non-connect, so it can be in superposition all at the same time. what if it's all the same simple particle, just in infinite superpositions? I'm doing a Terrence Howard. Okay, I'm just making shit up as I go along.
The single electron theory,
the single electron.
I heard about on Bad Science Sunday quite some time ago, but it's in one of those episodes. Yeah,
I wasn't referring. I just made shit up just then. I'm a genius apparently. So yeah,
it's a conspiracy theory that's been around for a while. Okay, it's not really a conspiracy theory. It's more of a Terrence Howard. Somebody made up a thought when they were high, and nobody's been able to definitively debunk it, because while we can't actually prove there isn't a single electron going backwards and forwards through time for some reason, but why the fuck would we think that's the case?
Right.
Let me just throw in one more point, because I know we're almost out of time here, and
I know it's crazy.
And I wanted to make this other point though a couple of minutes ago, which is that another problem, it seems to me, with taking this route is that if you say, okay, so the fundamental simples have a property of existential inertia, but we're not real, or a power of existential inertia, excuse me, but we're not really going to be realists about power. So the power of existential inertia, like every other power, collapses into the bearer. They're ultimately identical. That starts to sound to me suspiciously like the Thomist idea that God is identical to his existence. The power of existential inertia is identical to the bearer of the power. That's like Aquinas saying that God's existence is identical to God himself. And so we're back with this, just a riff on this general problem that I'm suggesting faces your view, that it's going to be a sort of backdoor.
Okay, well, because you answered my questions, I'll answer yours, Taps. So with existential inertia, really, he's kind of saying, why do things persist in reality? So basically, he's saying that things have a tendency, once they've begun to exist or formed into the current form they have, they will continue to exist. So that's what he's sort of talking about. Now, we can kind of just say, well, if the first instantiation of that thing has the power of continuing to exist, you don't have to maintain it. It just has that continuing power. And it's sort of, it's basically, to be honest with you, it sounds like conservation of energy in philosophical terms. Like, why do things not just, vanish into the ether as soon as they're there? He is trying to sort of, imply that it's a God that allows things to continue to exist as they are. But Oppy, on the other hand, says, well, if things do have that power, if they just have the ability to do that, then they don't need to maintain, as every instantiation throughout time will have that same property. So they'll just keep on going on.
It seems like he's stealing from a few centuries later on than he likes to pretend. It's almost Newtonian, an object in existence continues to exist until acted upon by another force,
Yeah, and that's where a free neutron would not have that power to continue. Like, it might have the power to continue for 15 minutes, to be stable for 15 minutes, and that's what Oppy's saying. I think Dr. Feser is sort of implying there must be something, perhaps, and I'm not sure if he used this word, but perhaps something transcendental that allows things to continue. Yeah. You're a muon.
Yo mama.
Your mama's a muon.
Entry into theism, when the whole point was to try to avoid theism.
So I think what would be good now, but it seems like we're going to run out of time, would be to move on to discuss the Thomistic proof, and in particular the idea that there's a distinction between essence and existence, and then after that to go on and maybe discuss the other distinction between form and matter as well.
Well, let me just ask you guys.
It looks as though we're not going to have enough time.
Would you be open to doing a part 2 sometime in the future? Not necessarily right now or in a week or in a month or anything, but we could schedule it out as far as we wanted to. Is that something you guys would be open to?
I'd be open to it.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of people are actually asking in the live chat because we haven't gotten super far in the discussion, and everyone kind of wants more and more and more, which is typically how these things go. Once you start to get into the weeds, it just, time flies basically. So why don't we take just about 10 minutes or so and talk about the Thomistic proof, and then we'll move into closing remarks and then to Q&A.
Okay, so do you want to start, or?
Oh yeah. So the Thomistic proof, this is it's so called because it's identified with Thomas Aquinas, though it's a proof that Aquinas, in formulating it, was influenced by earlier thinkers like Avicenna in the Islamic medieval philosophical tradition. And the basic idea is that the Thomistic proof argues that we need to draw a distinction in a thing between its essence, or what it is, and its existence, or that is to say the fact that it is, if indeed it is existent, if indeed it is real. And one way to look at this distinction and to see why for Aquinas there must be such a distinction is in terms of the following sort of example, which I give in the book. Suppose you're talking to somebody, maybe a little kid, who's never heard of 3 different animals: a lion, a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and a unicorn. And so you describe for him what each of these things is. You're describing the essence of each of these creatures.
This sounds sort of very Neoplatonic kind of thing in essence. It's very odd. Rabbit Atheist, I got to say, I'm not sure things actually have long-term inertia that I think they have. Well, I think you're right. I think that's very, very good comment, because things sort of don't stay the way they are. Everything is in sort of flux, is changing kind of thing. I mean, I brought up earlier radioactive decay is sort of, that it's not as stable as we think it is. And usually, nothing is in the state that it is in for too long. So I think that's a really prescient comment. I think that, it might not be the, categorically, absolute thing that he thinks that he's sort of implying that it is, that, hey, once a wooden board is a wooden board, it stays that way kind of thing forever. And that's not how things work. Just
the essence of what it is to be a lion, the essence of what it is to be Tyrannosaurus Rex, and the essence of a unicorn. And then suppose he's got a photographic memory and he's got perfect understanding of everything you told him, so he gets it. And you say, okay, now let me ask you, of these 3 creatures, one of them exists, still does, you can see it at the zoo. One of them used to exist but has gone extinct, and a third never did exist but is purely fictional. Which is which? Well, Aquinas points out that someone who knows that would not be able to tell you which is which. Knowledge of the essence wouldn't give you knowledge of the existence. So
knowledge of the essence wouldn't give you knowledge of the... Well, so as a nominalist, I would say that the descriptions given are just convenient labels that we use to define their properties, or what they have, the, they're descriptors basically. So if we say, hey, one is, white with a single horn, they're just tags that we're giving it. I don't think we're describing its essence. I think we're describing the thing itself.
Yeah,
like,
he's
I'm not
conflating essence in the spiritual or non-physical sense with essence as in give me the gist of it, give me the essence of the story or whatever, which is just a description. Like, you can describe an alligator or crocodile as a large reptile with a shit ton of teeth that's like half mouth or something, and you get the essence of the idea, but that doesn't give you the essence, like a physical thing I'm handing you of, oh, this is the property of crocodileness. Crikey.
Well, it seems to be sort of tied a lot to idealism, that something has some kind of existential existence outside of merely the physical, as sort of a provisional materialist and sort of empiricist, I believe my senses, and that material things seem to be the only thing that we can find. I don't think that there's any reason to believe that there is any existence outside of the purely physical. If there is, then I'd love you to demonstrate that. But you're sort of saying, hey, if you describe all these things and describe the essence of it, you are describing something other than a generalized description that covers all of the things of that category, right? So, or, you're not describing a particular unicorn, you're describing all unicorns, a general overview of unicorns. The as a nominalist, you'd say the descriptions that make a unicorn, right? So I don't think I need to believe in some essence of unicorn in order to describe a unicorn.
Yeah. And on your note about a sublayer of reality, I've read sci-fi. If we ever get access to subspace, we can do some cool shit, like go to K218b and check for life forms really, really fast, because, subspace lets you do shit like that, apparently.
The existence of a thing, you might say, is an additional...
the essence of another planet.
The essence of another, yeah. I'll describe to you the essence of another planet. Holy crap. But I mean, the whole point is that he is, like, this is why I sort of refer to platonics, like that you have, you know, all unicorns, and then there is a platonic ideal version of a unicorn which exists separately that gives the unicorns their unicornness, right?
That
like
raises an interesting question in and of itself, because if we can conceptualize a thing well enough to describe it to the degree that it qualifies as the essence of the thing, then it could be said that the essence of the unicorns does exist, even though the thing itself doesn't. And that leads us to sort of a tree falling in the forest, does anyone hear it sort of situation, because if there's an essence of a thing, but no physical extant examples of that thing manifesting in reality, can it be said to be real? And how does that apply to a god?
Well, I think it exists conceptually, right? We can describe the essence of, like, you can describe the essence of Thor, for instance, but that's not a real thing in the world. And like you said, you can describe the essence of a unicorn, but I think they are just conceptual. And, you know, I'll go to basically memes. They are ideas that are shared between people. Like, so we know what a unicorn is, or we can describe a unicorn because we understand the description of a unicorn. But that doesn't mean the unicorn exists, just as we can describe the essence of a god. But that doesn't mean that God exists. And more importantly, that doesn't mean the essence actually exists anywhere but conceptually as an abstraction. Because people can share abstractions. Like, I can just say you've never experienced math. I can still describe to you a triangle, you know, and that is, you know, the essence, as he says, of a triangle, but it's only a concept that I have shared with another human. I don't see why it's, you know, some kind of extra thing.
Yeah, it's an agreed upon series of conventions. I went a different direction with it mentally. I was thinking language, because when you get right down to it, we're just making noises at each other, and we've agreed on what those noises represent.
Well, there's sort of a question that, you know, I really have to talk to some more people a bit more knowledgeable in philosophy, but do social constructs exist? Like, does America exist? And I think it does, but as a concept shared between people, which is what a social construct is. So I think there is a sort of existence for the description of a unicorn, but I'm yet to be convinced of any reason apart from why it is an abstraction. And I might add, the description of a unicorn back in medieval times, say Aquinas's day, was very different to our description of a unicorn today. So did this essence shapeshift in some day? Because back in his day, it was more like a goat with cloven hooves and much smaller than what we would, you know, what sort of popular culture has described as a unicorn.
I was thinking the same thing, because this was a thing that I got into fights with people on the internet over. Oh, unicorns are mythical. I'm like, no. The modern Americanized idea of a unicorn, this horse with a horn, that probably doesn't exist. But the heraldic unicorn, the kind of unicorn that you see on coats of arms and shit from the Renaissance and earlier periods, that, I mean, it has a beard, it has cloven hooves, it's waist high. It is a goat with a single horn, and those do exist. There's a petting zoo for them in the fucking Alps, you know?
Yeah. But, you know, a lot of the update is, you know, this unicorn has magical powers. That's obviously not real, you know, like a lot of the stuff surrounding it. So yeah, it sort of makes this idea of something having an essence, if it can just change because the concept of it changes within human society, then what does that say about the essence of it? How does our changing thoughts about it change the essence?
Yeah, can a thing have essential characteristics if it's subject to reinterpretation by the mind doing the understanding?
Yeah. Yep.
Principle. It's an additional aspect of it, put it that way, distinct from its essence. Its essence and existence are distinct. Okay. Now, if its essence and existence are distinct, then that means that for a thing having a certain essence to be real, to be a feature of the world around us, existence has to be added to it. For lions to exist, and you need not just the essence or nature of being a lion, lionness, if that's a word. Well, lionness means something else, but anyway, the essence of being a lion. You need existence added to that.
Well, no, you only just need existence added to the lion, and we just describe the lion. You know, I think he's thinking about this, in my opinion, kind of backwards. He's thinking, okay, it has this essence that we describe.
Thinking about things backwards? That never happens.
Well, this is the difference between, say, an idealist and a nominalist, right? Like, so, you know, I would say that, hey, the lion is the real thing, and our description of it is abstract, right? It's just simple. It's just this list of traits that we have as universals, like, you know, well, it's a cat, it's, you know, it's sort of tan in color, it has a mane. All of these things we just apply to say, hey, that is the traits of a lion, and that's how we describe it, right? And then he's sort of going, well, there's this sort of idyllic concept of a lion, and in order for the lion to exist, it needs existence added to it.
So I thought the traits and properties, the descriptive characteristics of a thing, had a parasitic relationship with the actuality. But now he's saying, no, the collective sum of these traits and characteristics, the metaforms that feed into the lionness, that establish what the lionness is, that's the real thing, and it needs the trait of existence-ness attached to it to actualize. But then, if that were the case, why is every lion not an identical copy of the perfect ideal lion? Now you have to presuppose there's some sort of filter between this actualizing existence-ness and the emergent reality. Perhaps it's sin. In order to become real, you have to go through the sin membrane, which makes you unperfect in some indescribable way. And that's another property.
It's more Platonic forms, because they say that, like, there's one lion with lionness, and everything's a shadow of that. So that's like Plato seeing shadows on the wall and saying, hey, that's why everything doesn't look the same, because in, you know, where you move the light and how distant stuff, it distorts it to make it look different, which is not how things work. You know, like, we know that isn't, you know, why lions look, you know, are different. That's genetics, but, you know, that was a bit after Plato's time, just saying. But, you know, there's you know, this argument for it, which I don't know why this even exists, you know. And you're right, he switched around the parasitic relationship. It's the real lion is now parasitic upon the sort of Platonic lion essence that he's described. It's a reverse parasite. He pulled the old reverse parasite move. It's a classic. It's a classic.
It's got the opposite charge. It's an anti-parasite.
But what gives it its charge?
Well, for that you need the essential property of
and that's what we call God. Fantastic.
Ta-da!
A god from nothing. Oh wow. Okay.
Okay. And that's as true for Aquinas at any moment that a thing exists as it is when it first comes into being. Because
can I just say, fuck, I hate Aquinas. Like, seriously, I really dislike Aquinas. It seems so bad. Like, I don't know. Maybe he's got something worth a damn, but it
drives me crazy, because, like, they talk about Aquinas the same way they talk about C.S. Lewis, because he was the greatest of his age, but everything he wrote was debunked by his own contemporaries. The same as with Lewis. Like, oh my goodness. Just, I get it that he's the best you've got, but if he's making bad arguments, they're still bad arguments.
Well, I mean, it's like some people get on this thing about Kant as the most amazing philosopher that ever, you know, he's just incredible, and they're like into these Kantian ethics and stuff. And then, you know, you look at Hume, and Hume just absolutely destroyed and overshadowed him. Like, he never managed to come up to Hume. And that's not saying Hume is perfect and, you know, he's this amazing, incredible thing. It's just, you know, a lot of his stuff just didn't hold up to even the philosophers at the time, much less the philosophers today.
Well, you only think Hume is so great because you haven't thought of a better alternative.
That's fair.
Because it's not just when a line.
Hey, Hume's pretty awesome. Don't get me wrong. He's pretty good. But, you know, I think that different people provide different perspectives that all, you know, that we learn off. That's why philosophers don't just read one person and then go, aha, you know, Kant had it right and that's all. They read a ton of stuff and, you know, and then
you get addicted to the brain tangles. You read, you know, pages and pages and pages of setting the stage, and then you get that aha moment, and you can feel the fucking light bulb go off as your brain shifts into a new perspective. But it doesn't establish a concrete perspective. It broadens the variety of perspectives you already have available, and then you go read another philosopher and it opens up another window, and you get addicted to collecting these windows.
And first comes into being that its essence and existence are distinct, but at any moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bertrand Russell is pretty damn good. Yes, I will agree. And I mean, there's been contributors to, you know, like Thomas Locke, for instance, on Social Contract, and you know, even Hobbes before him, even though he probably didn't have a good as, you know, thing as Hobbes and as Locke, sorry. And then you have people like I've had a mental blank. Who did the Veil of Ignorance? I've totally forgot. I mentioned it today. John Rawls, right? So, you know, how, you know, in John Rawls was fantastic in moral ethics and how society forms and what we sort of owe to others in society. Absolutely fantastic. So, you know, absolutely. Bertrand Russell was amazing. Yes, agree. Hell, Alex O'Connor is pretty damn good. Let's face it. Let's not, you know, cancel out the current philosophers that are around.
I don't know. I mean, he's good in debates with theists, although his choices of opponents is somewhat questionable. But is he contributing? What?
Well, you said choice of opponents is questionable, and I said so's mine.
Well,
so,
yeah,
you know,
that's true.
I can't throw stones in my glass house here.
I'll throw stones from my hobbit hole. It'll be fun. But has he contributed new philosophy? Is he creating original work or just utilizing what already exists?
Well, no, I think he's utilizing whatever exists, but he's still very young. You know, this is the thing. You've got to remember that Bertrand Russell did most of his greatest work in, you know, 60s and things like that. You know, it's sort of, it seems to be a old person's game kind of thing. Like, you know, as you work up this knowledge,
you need as many windows open in your brain as you can to see something new.
All the windows.
Moment at which it exists, its essence and existence are distinct. So there needs to be something external to it. It can't be the thing itself on pain of self-causation, which is impossible for Aquinas. I think he's right in saying that's impossible. It has to be something distinct from the thing that accounts for how its essence has existence imparted to it. And that's true here and now, not just at some point in the past. And if that thing, let's call it C, which is causing its essence to have existence imparted to it, it itself has a distinction between its essence and its existence. There'd have to be some further thing, B, which accounts for C's existence, so C can account for the line's existence here and now. And what we've got here is another instance of what I referred to earlier and what I described in the book as a hierarchical causal series, where the intermediate causes are absolutely inert unless there's a first cause which gives them power to produce the ultimate effect. And in this case, this causal series has...
That's a lot of words to just say, you know, everything has to have a cause. The universe has to have a cause. Because, I mean, we can establish causal links all the way back to the Big Bang, essentially. You know, or possible causal links, at least, where our, you know, knowledge is a bit fuzzy. So I'm not sure where you get the idea that the essence must be something that is real. I don't think he's demonstrated that.
He's also, without implicit special pleading, he's also inviting an infinite regress, because the essence can't actualize without being acted upon by a cause, but the cause in turn needs to be actualized by a preceding cause. And you get a chain of events, and it's gonna eat its own tail.
Well, God must have an essence, right? Like, so God must have an essence because he is described so often. And if he doesn't have an essence or something to describe him that is separate from other things that are not God, then, how do you differentiate that being between not God? So I think the question for me would be, well, if something cannot impart itself with essence, then where does God's essence come from?
Indeed. It's a fascinating. It also, because my brain is going in multiple directions at the same time, it reminds me of something that a pastor once told me when I was very young. Something along the lines of, God is all things, exists with all things, on the basis that, God is the underpinning reality that gives realness to all things. And I had to wonder, and this was one of the times that I got, get out of my church. If God is all things, then what distinguishes God from not God? Like, is there anything that isn't God? It creates internal contradictions. It's a shame I didn't get an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. But I think you'd probably respond to my inquiry as, the first cause doesn't have to have a cause kind of thing. But then it would raise the question with me, well, how do you know that first cause was a God and not something else? It seems to be sort of heading towards that special pleading of, well, God's a special example of something that doesn't need an essence imparted on it, but everything else does, even things that aren't God's, even if they were the first cause.
I mean, it's already special pleading because, how do we get to the idea of a first cause? Because I wanna, is what it boils down to, we don't have any reason to think so. But we get sidetracked, we get red herringed into, well, how do you justify that it's the thing you say it is? When what we should really be asking is, why should we even think that? Why should we accept that premise?
Right.
It has to trace downward to something in which there is no distinction between its essence and its existence. Its very essence just is to exist. Its very essence just is to be, as it were. That in outline is what I call the Thomistic proof.
Right. So
not a great proof.
I agree that there's a distinction that we can draw between being essentially F and being accidentally F. So
all I can think of is effed and accidentally effed. And I'm sorry, I'm tired.
Might be that I'm accidentally human, but essentially possessed of a particular genetic makeup, for example. Maybe that's not the best example to give, but anyway, that will do. But I think that in order that
I think he's sort of saying that, hey, when it comes to essence, we don't need anything with intentionality to impart it upon us. Like, it might just be, a series of what we would call deterministic steps that arrived me at human without anything deciding it was going to impart the essence of humanity on me, right? Like, I want this thing to have this. So I think he's sort of going back to, well, how do you know it was a God to impart what you're calling essence on us? I mean, I would challenge that an essence is even a real thing. Like, I don't think it is. I think that the essence is just a convenient label for all of the attributes we'd describe something with. But, if you have to entertain that, then I guess fair enough. You can say, well, who says that it was intentionally done? I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, it implies determinism based on what we actually observe, because when it makes me think of our creationist friends. You've never seen a human give birth to, if there were the possibility of not imbuing a new being with humanness through the inevitability of genetics, then we might expect to see things give birth to all sorts of things because they just were imbued with different properties. It's everything is related to the thing that came before. The cause is the preceding state of affairs, not some ineffable essence in the ether.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And our essence isn't, you know, to use that word, the essence is entirely contingent upon what the essence was before. And I agree with that, that if we didn't have the essence of, you know, primitive, let's say, Australopithecus, then we wouldn't have the essence of human. If we had cephalopod essence, then we wouldn't have human essence now. So I think that that's a really important point, Amber, that you know, it's all contingent on these essences following one another. You know, so why couldn't it be the case that, and plus in the Bible, and let's tie it to the Bible because really he's a Christian. You know, it says that it just created man out of nothing. So he imparted that breath of life and essence onto humans, which isn't how anything works. You know, like that is not how we got here, and we know that through science. There's a ton of evidence for it. And Dr. Tapioca Weasel gifted 5 readerships. Thank you so much, you fearsome ferret. And we have Tori Swansiger, Keystone Eon, Stacy C, Sarah Quell. Love you, baby. Nancy is just talking. That's not you. I rescind that shout out. Blaster Master 80. Awesome. Thank you so much. Enjoy your emotes and other benefits. Winners, chicken dinners. And Jester with the $5 super chat, the ex-Freedom Bucks. I think we ignored 2 important philosophers here. One who's notably spark embers in all of us to read deeper into things and find truth. Well, you know, apparently we're just one person now on this show, and we were going, what were we called? Embark or something? Or was it E-Mark, maybe? I can't even remember. Embark.
I think we had a poll on it, but I think Embark won, yeah.
Yeah, Embark won. So apparently we're just one sort of, you know, what's it called? A gestalt entity that is multiples made up of one. We're like a trinity, but just a duity. Just
a duality.
A duality, apparently. So not as good as a trinity, apparently. But you know, we're trying. We're trying. We were made by Nil, the creator of the non-god creator of gods.
Nil, the great not god and creator of creator gods. I can't bring up the graphic on actually,
okay,
maybe
that's okay.
Maybe I can. Let me see here. I think if I turn my camera off, background thing. Yeah, there's Nil. Yeah.
There's Nil. There you go. There's Nil. Diune being. There you go. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Tap, and thank you, Jester. I really appreciate it, mate. I try my best, you know.
But you need to understand what it is for something to be essentially F. The most plausible account that I know is this one, that necessarily for any XX is essentially F, just in case necessarily if it exists, it's intrinsically F. So putting it kind of crudely, the essential properties of a thing, it's necessarily intrinsic properties, given that it exists. Now, on that account of what it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. He's sort of saying that the properties of it is kind of what the existence of it with those properties is what makes the properties, because if it didn't exist with those properties, it would be something else. I think he's trying to get around to the nominalist position sort of in a roundabout way. He's sort of saying, hey, those are just the properties of it, and there's no reason to think that the essence is something separate. It just is intrinsic to that thing.
And we see that in things with changeable properties. Like if you take a chunk of ice, it has certain properties, but then you melt it. Did the essence change? Did the substance change which essence it's drawing from to develop? No, it is the thing, and then we describe the properties that it's demonstrating in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of what being essentially F here amounts to. It turns out that existing is one of the essential properties, right? If you go back and think about it, what I said was necessarily if it exists. So go back necessarily for anything, it's essentially F just in case necessarily if it exists. it's intrinsically F, right? And it follows directly from that existence is going to be one of the, I mean, talking a way that I prefer not to, existence is one of the essential properties. Now, you might not like that way of accounting for what essential properties are. We could argue about the merits of it, but if it's correct, then it just isn't true that essence, and to speak in your terminology, that essence and existence are distinct. Rather, existence is just part of essence. I mean, to say it in a different way, things only have essential properties, and they only exist if they exist, right? There aren't any non-existent things. There aren't essences out there waiting to be joined to existence, right? On my view, I mean, I take it that your view bears a kind of family resemblance to Meinong's view, that there are lots of things that in some sense have being but don't exist. That's where the essences are. They're distinct, right? The uninstantiated essences are. And so,
yeah, and I want to refer to an argument that I had, and I brought this up, I think, in the previous debate review, that the Plumbus argument against Platonic forms. That Rick and Morty, you may be familiar with it, you might not be, but basically they went to watch alternative dimension television, and there was something that called a plumbus, and the joke kind of was in the show that it didn't really have, like, we didn't know what the function of it was, what it entailed. We didn't know because they just made it up. These two people, Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland's, the writers of the show, just sat down and wrote a thing called a plumbus, and they basically showed it, and you had to make sure its sneed or something was rubbed, and all of these different properties to it. But it wasn't a thing that existed, right? It was just, they made it up for just something ridiculous to happen in some alternative possible world, right? Some alternative dimension. So does that mean that the essence of the plumbus was hanging around somewhere, just waiting for them to make stuff up? And now you can buy a plumbus online. We can describe a plumbus to one another, where before you couldn't. So did the essence start existing, and where did it start from? Or was the essence of a plumbus just hanging around until these two very insane writers, you know, wrote down this thing, and then cartoonists made a picture of it? Like, it sort of makes this weird thing of, does every possible thing that could ever be thought of exist as an essence somewhere, you know, just waiting for somebody to think of it? What if nobody ever thinks of it? Is that an unrealized plumbus? I don't know, but it's very, very strange to me.
It has certain similarities to the concept of souls, where in this atemporal parallel universe of some sort, every soul of every human who ever existed, could exist, would exist, etc., is there waiting for its moment of actualization. And if you know, two people meet by chance at a high school dance and wind up having a child, then one soul becomes actualized. But if they meet different people and end up with different children, then different potential souls are actualized.
Right.
It's just, but all possible souls already exist, you know. It's
and it also
weird.
You know, twins, what happens with the soul when it splits up, you know, and twins, like identical twins happen, where the ovum splits multiple times and makes two people. Like, what was there, one soul? Did they have to, like, shoot another soul in somehow? Like,
the Vatican's tried to address it, but that invites another interesting peculiarity, because, as you know, I'm a chimera. I'm reverse twins.
Yeah.
Do I have two souls? And what's going on here? Maybe I
don't know. Maybe
I'm double souled. I'm double jointed and double souled. It's fantastic.
It's people like you that are the reasons redheads don't have souls. It's terrible. You have two, and some redheads out there have none. It's so selfish, Amber. I tell you.
I just don't accept any of that kind of metaphysics.
I'm an over-actualizer.
An over-actualizer. I love it.
This kind of argument off right at the beginning.
I think this guy's an over-actualizer, Dr. Ed Feser. I think you're an over-actualizer, sir. You're trying to actualize the essence of something when really, to me, that's just a description that conveys meaning between people. I don't know why we would consider that to be something real.
Beginning with the idea that there really is this distinction between the existence of a thing on one hand and its essential properties on the other hand, because actually its existing just is one of its essential properties.
So before you jump back in, Ed, we're going to have to cut it down. So basically what I think we're going to do at this point is take a couple minutes, respond to what he just said, and then from there we'll do closing remarks, and then we'll jump to the Q&A.
Okay. So I mean, there's a lot there, and there are all kinds of complex metaphysical issues that arise here. And one of them is that Graham won't be surprised to hear me say this, that I wouldn't accept that account of essence. So I don't think of an essence as a bundle of properties, for example. The essence is what grounds the properties, and so on and so forth. But even bracketing all that off, I mean, and I also think that the argument can be run without having to get into the question of the ontological status of essences. Are we thinking of them as Meinongian? Are we thinking of them as Platonic and so on? I think that, at least to a large extent, the argument can be run by bracketing that off. But putting those points aside, I mean, the first objection that occurs to me to Graham's position is that if we make a thing's existence part of its essence, then we seem to make of everything essentially a necessarily existing thing. That if it's part of the thing's very essence that it exists, then it's no longer really a contingent thing. It's got a kind of a necessary being to it. And
your dualistic name is M. Reed. Jester with the $2 to tell me I'm wrong about our nickname. Okay, Jester.
But that's part of a first name and an entire last name. Those are different existential categories.
Yeah. That you've made a category error according to Embark here. Yeah, you've made a category error.
Oh, but if I do count as a double-souled being, then we are a trinity.
That's true. I didn't realize that. We are a trinity. Awesome. Who gets to be the human part? Yeah. Do you want to be the Holy Ghost? I think I'm white enough to be the Holy Ghost, quite frankly.
So you're going to make me, the woman, be the father and son?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, you've got to be one of them, right? If you've got two out of the three, you've got to have one. You
can make a pretty strong argument that Jesus was trans.
Well, that's true. That the Jesus argument for trans support. Yeah, I love that one. But thank you, Jester. I really appreciate it, mate.
Once we say that, for one thing, it's a strange thing to say about any material object. And secondly, if we're going to press it and say that a material object is really a necessary rather than a contingent thing, then it's going to be hard to avoid some kind of theism, even if it's a pantheism, according to which the objects of our experience are really, because they're really necessary beings, and only misperceived by us as contingent, that our awareness of material reality is really a kind of confused awareness of God understood in a pantheist way.
So now I have to hear how Graham is going to respond to that, and then we'll move to closing.
Okay, so the way that I'm thinking about essences, the only things that have essences are existing things. That's why existence turns out to be part of essence. But lots of existing things exist only contingently. There's nothing in the view that commits me to the idea that just because, as you might say, existence is part of essence, that therefore everything exists of necessity. That just simply doesn't follow.
Yeah, so the difference between necessary and contingent is that necessary things are not reliant on any cause to be in the universe, that they just are. Contingent are basically reliant on some other state of affairs in order to exist. So I'm contingent on my parents, kind of thing. They're not contingent on me, right? Like, yeah. But if you're sort of saying, hey, it has to be a necessary thing, I don't think that follows at all. I agree with Oppy. That doesn't follow at all. There's plenty of contingent things that have essence, basically, as you know, Dr. Feser is describing it. You know, I think that it is, but I think Oppy's getting at that the properties are what are real, because we have sort of conceptual properties, like, I say that something has these properties that doesn't exist, that would make the properties conceptual. Like the unicorn is magical, for instance. That's a conceptual property. But, as part of what you're describing, these things exist because you're describing something that exists. So I get where he's coming from. But I don't see why that would have to be necessary. I really don't. I'm not following that at all.
I've never really. I mean, it's interesting as a thought exercise, this consideration between necessary and contingent, but I don't get down with the idea as a conceptual model of a way to describe reality, because I don't see any reason to think of things as being necessary and contingent as a valid thing, because as far as we can tell, lacking counterfactuals, alternate universes, and different temporal possibilities, everything seems to be necessary, even though it's causally contingent on other things.
Yes.
There's no distinct. It's a difference without a distinction, you might say. So I don't see the point of putting a lot of effort into it.
It isn't, because when you're sort of talking about necessary and contingent, you're sort of talking about relationships between things. So, for instance, my parents are necessary for me, and I'm contingent on them, but they're not contingent on me, and I'm not necessary for them, right? Whether or not my parents had me, they would still exist, right? Like, it seems to be the case that I am not necessary for them to start existing or come into being or form or whatever you want to describe it. But it is for me, they're necessary for me.
From a direct causal point of view, yeah. But I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking of things outside of linear time too much, because it's well, I'm trying to
I
formalize
get you.
a whole bunch of,
like, I'm thinking like
thoughts.
Einstein's sort of block universe, that in that case everything is necessary. That if time is just one of the dimensions of a block universe, then everything in it is necessary, because the universe is, because it exists not in a time but all times at once. So, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know 100% that's true, but it's really interesting to think about.
Well, it's a model versus place kind of thing. It's a description of how things seem to be from a certain point of view, but it doesn't mean that is the thing itself. It's the universe is what the universe is. By my lights, I look at it as kind of a resolving quantum superposition, because remember, superposition isn't a real thing, it's a conceptual thing that we use to make our math work. But the way we resolve a quantum superposition is we take all the possible outcomes, and just as for example, you've got a +1 outcome and a -1 outcome, and they negate, and then you've got a +2 outcome and a -2 outcome, and they negate, and so on and so forth. And the last thing that you're left with, the sole possible outcome that doesn't get negated, that's the actuality. I think reality is kind of the same way. There's a number of theoretical possibilities, but what actually happens is the necessary thing, because it's the only thing that can actually happen.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's going to bake my noodle, but I'm too tired. And just an Antichrist Trinity should be mother and daughter. I agree. And Alex said the mother, the daughter, and the unholy spirit. So you can be the mother and daughter, and I can be the unholy spirit.
Hell yeah.
I think you got better names than I did, but hey, I'll wear it. I am the unholy spirit. You watch out. Either that or I have unholy spirits, one of the two.
You invoke the essence of the unholy spirituality.
all I can think now is vanilla essence. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I feel like he's baking something. Oh, you're the essence you put in. Is God just baking a cake? Let's put the essence in, vanilla essence. I don't know. I'm tired.
From the view. The view is a view about going back to the idea that what's fundamental here is the distinction between being essentially a certain kind of way and being accidentally a certain kind of way, right? And adding that to what some people call existentialism, the view that the only things that there are things that exist, right? So that you don't have the domain of non-existence. That's how I got the conclusions out. So I'm not worried about the idea that this is going to commit me to everything existing of necessity. I just think that doesn't follow.
Well, I don't know, Cameron, you want me to respond to this or not, or fold it into a closing statement? Maybe I can do that.
Okay. All right. Well, let me do this then.
Statement, and then Graham can give Graham the last word. But
yeah. I like to do last words to the non-Christian.
But first, a word from our capitalism.
And also, if you want to add a response in there, you can, and then we'll move to Graham, and then we'll close this part of the discussion out.
All right. So whatever the details of Graham's own distinct account of essence, it seems to me like, as at least in common with other accounts of essence, that the essence of a thing is what makes it what it is and what it could not exist without. And so if we include existence without...
I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying that sort of, if the thing exists, then it has the essence of existence already. Like, I think I get what he's saying, that you don't need to add existence to an essence to make it appear out of nowhere, or actually exist. I think that the property in the essence of existence just is there. It's one of the things that it is. So I don't think he's saying that. I really don't. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
What if it's not a simple on-off switch, but like everything else in reality, there's waves, there's levels, there's degrees that we can measure, but they just denote plot points on what's actually a curve. And the further back in time you go, you have the potentiality for a thing's existence. And as you move forward through time and the circumstances begin to align, the contingencies begin to show up, then the potential for the existence increases and increases until the thing actually exists. It crosses that threshold, and now it's real, and it definitely exists. And because it exists, it not only possesses that capacity for existence that's been imbued in it by the alignment of the contingent circumstances, but it also becomes necessary at that point because it crossed the threshold. I don't know. I'm tired too.
Yeah. Just says the rule of immature answer says that my name pick is correct. I'm sorry. I follow the rule of cool, and I reject your rule of immature answers for the rule of cool. And Embark sounds cooler than Embreed.
Well, if we reverse it and we combine Mark with Belrad, then we end up with Marad. And that's objectively more rad than Embreed.
It's a rule of cool, not rule of rad. I'm sorry. That
tried.
stopped being cool in the 80s, Ember, and you know it.
Within the essence of a thing, including of a physical object, then we're really saying that the existence of anything, including any physical object, is going to be part of what it is to be that thing, and that it could not be without. It wouldn't be a stone or an apple, say, if it didn't have existence, because existence is part of the essence, and the essence of a thing is what it is. The apple or the stone is what it is to be an apple or a stone. So I'm not clear still on how we can avoid this conclusion that everything ultimately ends up existing of necessity, with all of the implications that's going to have. So folding this into just a general closing statement, I guess I want to say that, in my opinion, the ultimate dispute between atheism and theism is probably going to lead us in something like the kind of outcome we've had in just our hour-and-a-half discussion here, which is that we're either going to end up pressing the project of explanation as far as it can go to the bottom metaphysical level, in which case we're going to get to something that exists of necessity. And whether we think of it as God or not, or we think of it as just laws of nature, we think of it as ultimate simples or what have you, when we unpack it, we're going to find that it's going to bear very strong resemblance, or even really be identical to God as conceived of in the classical theist tradition, as conceived of by an Aristotelian or a Thomist or a Neoplatonist or someone like that. Or we're going to, in order to avoid that, going to have to back away from the project of ultimate explanation and end up with some kind of brute fact position, which would violate the principle of sufficient reason, which is something we didn't really have time to get into. Yeah. But where I think that position is, for reasons I get into in the book, is ultimately incoherent. It's ultimately something, especially if you're going to pursue science, which I think is always, at least implicitly, is committed to some version of the principle of sufficient reason. It's going to undermine the position of any atheist who takes it. You're going to have to avoid theism. You're ultimately going to have to deny principle of sufficient reason, but that's going to ultimately commit you also to denying the things you want to affirm, including the explanatory efficacy of science and so forth. That's what I think the dispute between the two views ultimately boils down to.
Yeah, but I mean, science is methodological naturalism. You're not bringing a God into that anyway, or it can lead to it, but you're not allowed to start with it. So this whole idea of non-empirical things like essences would never get into science to start with. That's not what it's for. You know, you can only go on empirical data. So empirical meaning what you can sense. Either you can view it, you can, you know, interact with it in some way, or you can measure it with some kind of device, like something empirical. So, you know, I don't know how you would sort of say, well, you know, the principle of sufficient reason is used in science, so you're going to need something. No, we wouldn't use something like this in science. Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's a little too presuppositionally. And if you're going to presuppose shit, then why are you bothering to do science?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's the difference in perspectives. The reason I can't quite see from Ed's perspective is because, you know, he's all principle of sufficient reason and brute facts, and I'm like, let's go look. Let's do an experiment and check. You know, it's incompatible points of view, perhaps.
But I think that, you know, from sort of a debate or a scientific viewpoint, you would have to show that the essence is actually a thing. I don't think argumentation is enough to sort of get you over the line of showing that essences are a real thing. I think you would have to demonstrate that with finding an essence.
That book series that I mentioned earlier, where the gods are personifications of specific things that humans do, they also have essences. That's how they get their magic powers. They're little cubes of somethingness, right? Like there's a dark essence, but there's also a plant essence or a sword essence. Like anything that can be a conceptual thing can be an essence. And then you get magic powers that are related to the thing. Like the main character gets a dark essence, and the very first power he gets from it is called Midnight Eyes. It lets him see in the dark. It's kind of the opposite of dark, but it's related.
But anyway, I'll leave it to Graham now to give us the last word.
Okay, so I should respond to something that you just said, I think. So on my view, the way that I think about necessity is brute, right? So if you say something's necessarily the case, I can explain why it is the case by appealing to its necessity. But then if you ask me, why is it necessary? We've reached rock bottom. There's no further thing to be said. Every position ends up finding things that are brute. And in fact, there's a kind of question about whether you should prefer brute contingencies to brute necessities. I prefer myself brute necessities, but lots of people don't. Where does the necessity come in the view that I prefer? Because we didn't really explore this question very much. I think that there's, if you think about natural reality, and suppose, it seems reasonable to me that it's got an initial part, then the initial part will be necessary. So every possible world shares some initial history with the actual world, branches from it, diverges from it only because chances play out differently. The evolution of the world's not deterministic. That's the kind of basic picture I've got. So I do have...
Oh, I don't know about that one, Champ. I probably wouldn't agree with that. I think that evolution is very deterministic. I think there can be, I mean, you know, so evolution of the word, I think he's talking about multiple forms of evolution. I think some are highly deterministic, but I think that there is some randomness as far as, you know, biological evolution, like there is a genetic drift and that kind of thing in there. But
I think he's talking at a more very, very basic level. Like when you flip a coin, you know, that generates multiple branches of possible worlds, one where it comes up heads, one where it comes up tails, and maybe even one where it lands on its edge. That's what he means about the evolution, because, you know, you go down the heads trail or the tails trail or the other trail or whatever, that sort of thing.
I don't know. I don't think in terms that possible worlds actually exist in any kind of form at all. Like, I really think there may be descriptive of how things could have been if certain necessary things were changed. You know, like we could envisage a change from that, instead of coming down heads, coming down tails. But I'm not sure that I believe that there's any actual world that's generated by this, any world in reality. It's just a, like I said, like a mental construct, a
thought experiment.
Concept. Well, just an abstraction of how things could be different if something were changed. So because not only does a coin flip not contain the requisite energy necessary to generate an entire additional universe, but the coin flip, and I know people have argued with me on this one. They're like, oh, well, the different train tracks of possible universes already exist, and the coin flip just determines which track you go down. But it doesn't have enough energy to shift the inertia, the existential inertia of a universe onto a different track either. Yeah.
But that's all side stuff. The main point is that the outcome of the coin flip is deterministic. You don't know what it's going to be until you look, but what it's going to be is determined based on the properties of the coin, how hard you flip it, how much rotation, how much goes into height versus rotation. All the factors from the moment you flip are already determined. It will come out a certain way. Just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean you're generating alternate universes where every possible outcome happens.
Yeah. And I mean, we know this because you can get weighted coins that change the deterministic probability. And so probability is kind of just, I mean, it's kind of difficult to describe. It's more just, you know, I don't think it's a case that the probability is sort of completely random. I think that it's determined, but the deterministic properties are fluctuating so that you get different results every time, and it looks random. There is a case to be made that there is nothing random. It's all pseudo-random. It looks random because that's a term from computing. Pseudo-random is when you use certain variables, like, you know, the time since Microsoft Windows went into production, you know, or was programmed, and, you know, you do an algorithm on it to, you know, do variation with today's date and all of these different stuff that you can gather, and, you know, it'll spit out something that for all intents and purposes is a random number. Like, it functions as a random number because of the way the algorithm works, but in reality it's all determined with these prior variables. Like, it's not a real random number.
Yeah, and I think that's true for everything. For everything, we just use random as a shorthand to say we can't accurately predict. Not that it actually is any potential outcome. It's all deterministic. And I got this from a dream too. It was several years ago. I had a time machine, and I went to the future because I'm a weirdo who goes to the future instead of going to the past for some fuck all reason. And I happened to check tomorrow's lotto numbers, and I brought those lotto numbers back when I came back to the present, and I played those lotto numbers, and I lost. And I was like, how is that possible? I have I got the lotto numbers through time travel. And for some reason, the lady who was checking my ticket knew about quantum physics and said, oh, silly, if it's truly random, they can't be the same numbers. And I was like, well, fuck. And that made me think about what's actually determined and what's actually random.
A necessity in there. And I'd see this view as being consistent with the principle of sufficient reason, at least a correct version of it, because it turns out that pretty much everything has an explanation. Of course, where you've got indeterminism, you're going to have only partial explanation, right? So if you've got an indeterministic cause, there are various ways things could have gone. Why did it go one way rather than another? Well, there's no answer to that. But you've still got a partial explanation of why this thing happened. Namely, there was this earlier thing, and there are various ways things could have gone, and it just happened to go this way. I don't see that, and many theists agree with this, that that's not a violation of the principle of sufficient reason either, right? I mean, to force determinism, if principle of sufficient reason entails determinism, most people worry, most theists that I know worry about that. So it better be that you can have indeterminism. So in actual fact, I don't think that the way that this ends up playing out is going to be something that forces atheists into an unfavourable position. But obviously, there's way more to talk about. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why we're going to do a part 2 if we can get it scheduled, right? So just wanted to remind everyone that we are going to be moving just in about 5.
Yeah, okay, so that's about it, really. So that's their closing statement. So we've come to the end of the debate, and yeah, they covered a lot. It was very complex, I will say that. I think we're really looking at two different worldviews. We're really looking at, on one side, you've got sort of a idea that the things that I would call properties and descriptors of something are really their own thing that exists separately from the entity or the thing itself, right? So you have, I'm bald, I'm white, I'm, have all these properties to me, and that somehow exists that is laid on top of me, and something like a god puts reality onto it, so I keep existing. And I think there's a big leap to get to that, as opposed to I exist first and primarily, and that's one of my properties. And then we use, I'm bald, I'm white, I'm tall, like all of these things as just descriptors. And there's no such thing as really an essence, is how I would look at it.
Yeah, it's like we were saying a moment ago, it's a map for the place kind of thing. You take the characteristics that you can describe a thing with, and you say that is like a sense of the essential nature. That's not really a thing, though. That's just a conceptual packet we're putting the idea in to make transmission a little easier.
Yeah. And I mean, it sort of raises the question about these essences. If I see you in a darkened alley and I describe you incorrectly, like, how is it that I am describing your essence? But if your essence isn't just your, physical being or the attributes that makes up your physical person, or, what I understand about you, why can't I describe your essence accurately? It seems to be hinging upon my ability to see you properly.
Yeah, it's very peculiar. It's almost like we're not perceiving essences, but we're just describing reality and then categorizing that as an essence.
Yeah.
When we happen to be right, because God forbid we use science, we have to just, I'm right because God or something.
Yeah. And it's very odd. And it also, like you brought up earlier, well, what if the essence changes? What if I decide to,
grow hair,
or, I lose my legs? Then the essence must change. And it's kind of odd that, is that God changing all of the essence kind of thing? Because that seems unnecessary, rather than the physical properties of the thing changes, and hence our description of the essence changes.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that leads to the bioessentialist arguments. People who make the case that effectively every person, the real person, is the soul. The characteristics about your physicality are irrelevant, and we need to get the heart of who a person is. Like what is their heart, as it were, because they're trying to work around that problem. But then that gives rise to a whole bunch of other problems, like personality changes from brain damage, for example, that we run into frequently. Any way you challenge this, the whole thing falls apart pretty dang quickly, which is one of the reasons nobody uses that argument anymore.
Right. I haven't heard like, don't get me wrong, I've heard like sort of Neoplatonic arguments. I have not heard anybody recently go to, Aquinas and his thoughts, because they kind of, to me, they kind of break down real fast, at least into sort of a assertion of something that just can't be demonstrated, something completely unfalsifiable. Because it's interesting you mentioned science, because the first thing it would do is demand that whatever it is you're looking at be falsifiable. And how do you falsify an essence? If you're claiming this thing exists somewhere that we can't access it at all, we can't touch it, it's just out there floating in the transcendent state somewhere. Like, how are we supposed to falsify that? We can't.
You need a spectroscope for spectral viewing.
An essence-oscope, maybe, I don't know.
An essometer.
An essometer. I love it.
Oh, what was that thing the Ghostbusters had? The PKE meter, psychokinetic
PKE
energy.
meter.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll detect those essences.
I would happily own a PKE meter. I won't lie to you. Are they that or the proton? The proton. What was it? A proton
pack? Yeah.
Proton pack. Yeah.
A miniaturized particle collider you can wear on your back. What could possibly go wrong?
What could go wrong? Anyway, that kind of brings us to the end, mother and daughter. So
now it sounds like a biblical passage.
Well, you're the mother and
Listen,
daughter, and I'm
wife,
Holy
sister.
Spirit.
Let's go forth to Egypt.
Well, that's true. I mean, you've got the father and son. Hello, father, son. It's like, what are we in the South? I don't. Anyway, it was marvelous as usual. Do you have anything to add? Any updates, information that people need to grab you?
Oh, well, I mean, to grab me, that's a whole other website.
Oh, charge extra, eh?
That's right.
Yeah.
But to catch me, let's see. I don't know. Everything is chaos. Transpositions Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to do another What's on Your Mind at some point, but I don't freaking know when, because schedules are chaos, and there's probably more. I know there's something coming up that I'm supposed to be announcing, but I don't recall what it is. The only thing I've got for sure in my memory bank, and this even has an asterisk because my guest may reschedule or cancel, but I'm doing, how to describe. So I run a Comic-Con every summer up in Watertown, New York, and I've got my co-director coming on to the Comic-Con's channel. We're going to do a live stream, which I'm also rebroadcasting on my main channel because we have a bunch of nerds in the community and thought y'all might like to watch. So that's set for, I believe it's set for May 2nd, which is still a little ways off, but not that far.
I think it's May 3rd to me, but that's okay. I got you.
Yeah. And so if that happens on time and on schedule, it should be pretty fun because we got a lot of cool shit to talk about.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Hey.
And I'll put the transpositions link in as well. So go subscribe to Ember. We will be back on Ember's channel next week for another debate review. It's your turn to choose again, because I obviously cannot choose a debate without getting completely busted by the system for reviewing something, apparently. So yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Amber. It was a pleasure.
Of course, these are always fun. Even the weird existential ones, like I don't know. It's more us and the chat, but the debate gives us a good springboard.
Right, and it definitely gives us a lot to talk about. So yeah, fantastic. I should be back. I will schedule in a tomorrow. Maya, what time does your Bad Science Sunday start? Isn't that like 10 o'clock my time or something like that?
9:30 Eastern.
9:30 Eastern?
Traditionally.
Okay. Traditionally.
And I believe because there may be exceptions. Like in a certain circumstance, it might start a little early or might start a little late or whatever. But normally, okay. I believe Bumblebee is this week's guest.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I like the
we're doing a better job than Bree did, because we've mentioned Maya's show twice on this show.
Well, it's
Bree's the guest and only plugged it once.
Yeah, I can't see. That's okay. Well, I might schedule something for earlier or later, depending on how it goes. But yeah, thank you so much, Amber. This has been wonderful. It's been a pleasure to see you. But I will try to do something. 9:30. Yeah, okay, no problem. I'll probably schedule something for 8:30 or something like that. Give it an hour. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining me. It's been a pleasure to see you. It's been awesome interacting with you, even though I am absolutely buggered. And yeah, please do check out the rest of my debates and things like that. Please do like and subscribe. If you can share it, it really helps me a great deal. And I appreciate every single little click that you click away at. Even the dislikes, go for it. Knock yourself out. But yeah, be kind to yourself. Be kind to each other. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye, team.
This old switchboard could talk. Wow. Your ears would sizzle. 1880. We take Alexander Graham Bell's invention for granted today. Perhaps we should. But isn't it incredible that millions and millions of people can talk simultaneously to practically any spot on Earth?